I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
Well, after all this time, it's finally here, the Factorio expansion. Considering they announced the expansion before I even started making videos, it's been on my mind for quite a while, but now I'm finally playing it. Actually, I've already played it at a LAN event, so I'm at least a little familiar going in, but playing on a team of 10 and playing by yourself is a big difference. Despite having access since way back in September, I'm only getting this video out now because that Megabase video took about 7 eternities to finish, but better late than never, right? Seeing as it's my first game, I'll obviously be choosing default settings, and even though I'm late, this was still started with a pre-release build, so some things aren't exactly as they are in the full release yet, as evidenced by that send feedback button up there. So despite all the grand visions of interplanetary travel and alien worlds, our start is still pretty much the same. We'll be mining directly with burner miners into furnaces to get iron plates so that we can make even more miners, then we'll use those to make even more iron plates. If this is your first time, welcome to Factorio. The crappy burner mining drills take coal, however, and to solve that, we'll place a few coal snakes, which is what I like to call 2 or more burner miners feeding into each other. One thing that's different is now I need to actually unlock the ability to make circuits by crafting 10 copper plates. It's part of the new trigger technologies, which they added to try and make it less overwhelming for the newer players. That being said, not seeing electric miners and inserters there in the crafting window feels wrong. To actually research something, we'll need a lab and some electricity, which requires a couple things like boilers and steam engines, but as long as you've got some iron plates in your inventory, you can craft everything you need by hand. Fill the boiler with water and then insert some coal, and you've got enough power to start some research. This is an automation game, so naturally, we want automation. The moment I've got assembling machines, what I like to do is set them up so that they can pull from some boxes filled with plates and craft things like belts and gears. Making stuff by hand is fine, but this way we'll be able to craft more things at once. I can do the same thing with the science ingredients and put them directly into the lab, so I'll at least get a trickle of research while building everything. Constantly needing to refuel things is really annoying, so I'll want to switch to electric miners as fast as possible. You're still technically burning coal to make them work, but it's just that it's all concentrated in one area instead of on every single miner. I'm also in a pretty barren desert, so just to be safe, I'm making some really early ammunition. The reason is clear, there's a bunch of nests to my left, and with this tiny base they're already starting to eat some pollution, so I've got to take them out. Just slam down some turrets and fill them with ammo and we're good to go. I'm not using them on the nests directly, instead preferring to take them out with a shotgun. Ammo's pretty scarce right now, and shotgun shells are way more economical for killing nests, and thanks to my parsimony I've got enough to take out the other base next door. This one's a little more challenging because it's got 2 worms, but this is where I'll unleash the forbidden wiggle maneuver to make the worms constantly miss. They try to shoot it where they think you're going to be, and if you're just jittering back and forth, that almost never is right on top of you. It's amazing how different the gameplay is when you spawn in a desert. Anyway, since I was gathering some raw resources in the meantime, I've got all I'll need to get started on true automation. I've also put down some bricks for some slight walking speed bonuses. And though things change, one thing remains the same, the furnace stack. 48 stone furnaces will output exactly 15 iron plates per second, which is exactly enough to fill a yellow belt. It's mostly just a matter of crafting the 100 inserters that one takes. I make another one for the copper and then set up several miners, which I've also made thanks to my bounty of raw materials. At the start of the game, it takes 30 miners to fill a yellow belt, and this starter patch can manage at least that. It's only once you have a stack of iron and copper that Factorio really starts. There are some quick assemblers to feed my growing hunger for belts, but the most important product is circuits, which I'll make right here. Once you have these fully automated, you can make all the buildings and science you want. But first I'm going to set up some gun turrets and ammunition. Not taking any chances here. Nope. So my last video was that mega base, and after all that optimization, my spaghetti soul is screaming out in pain. It's impossible to control at this point, and so I'm just building anything where it'll fit. That includes these builds for red and green science. This is certainly a little bit more than that one hand-fed assembler we started with, but with one gear assembler, we'll be able to take care of all these red assemblers. Green science takes inserters and a belt, but that still just takes iron plates and some circuits. That's all it takes, but with increased production comes increased power demands. But that's nothing a couple more boilers can't solve. As usual, I'm totally reliant on the starter coal patch for energy, and coal power is very stinky, meaning more biter attacks, but we'll deal with that later. Time to place down the labs. I'll put them down right here with the utmost confidence that I'll be able to route in all the other sciences later. Now at this point, I'm tired of crafting all my machines by hand, and so it's time to automate them. You can make pretty much everything you need with just iron plates and circuits, but sometimes you gotta turn the plates into gears first. Also, even though I make inserters for green science already, I don't make long inserters or fast inserters. Also, moment of silence for filter inserters. Nevermore will their purple perfection grace our factories. Moving on, it's time to make steel, which I can easily accomplish by making 2 more furnace stacks. The first one is to make iron plates, and the second one is to turn those into steel. Then I'll set up bricks real quick. You never need very many of these, but it's nice to have. Since I'm resolving to take these biters seriously, I'm going ahead and making some piercing ammunition. And I really am just letting my heart guide me on this one. Not only do these rounds make biters 60% more dead than the yellow ones, they're also used in military science. Then I'll use those bricks I just made to build some walls. Useful for defense, and also an ingredient in military science. 1 assembler is enough throughput for 10 science assemblers, so this is more than enough since I'm making only 5. The last ingredient is grenades, but I'll just be inserting those directly between assemblers. They just take some coal and iron, which I've got nearby. Yes, can you feel the spaghetti growing? But that's military science. Since I want to get into space as fast as possible, I'm not really building for expandability. I just want enough to make some supplies and some rockets. At least, that's my excuse for running this steel belt all the way around here. I'm going to use it to make some engine units, which are used in chemical science. Also, they're the only thing I can build for chemical science without researching oil processing. These will take more iron, and so I've set up another furnace stack, as well as shoved some automated power poles in here, you know, because they fit. Also, I've been placing gun turrets pretty much everywhere because of things like this. Nothing worse than having some biters chew apart parts of your base and then forcing you to walk all the way over there to fix it. My starting iron patch is already occupied with the original steel and iron stacks, and so I'll need more. Fortunately, there's another patch not far from my starting patch. Unfortunately, it is absolutely tiny. I can only fit like 27 miners, which isn't even enough to fully saturate a single yellow belt, but it's enough to sate my iron needs. For now. I kinda thought I'd make this video a little more oriented towards all the beginners who joined after the expansion, but nope, inscrutable spaghetti is impossible to resist. With those engines, I can make a car so I can start looking for oil. I also kill a bunch of nests while I'm at it. Downside to playing fast is you make tons of pollution. It's a good idea to go ahead and set up some fast belt automation. Fast belts will allow me to double the throughput of my furnaces as soon as I upgrade them to steel furnaces. Since those smelt twice as fast and fast belts move twice as fast, we'll still get a full belt out of them, except it's 30 per second instead of 15. Also, making good belts takes tons of iron, so might as well set up another mine since I've got some nearby. A little better than the last one, but still relatively small. I could use trains at this point, but yellow belts are way easier and way cheaper. I'll need some more circuits than the measly 4 assemblers I made for the green science, so here's some more assemblers. Don't ask me what happened with this design. I was experimenting with something new, but then decided I didn't actually care, and soon enough this monstrosity appeared. I like to think I'm an inspiration. You can build straight trash so long as it outputs what you want. I don't actually have them researched yet, but I'm already building for advanced circuits. One of these days I'll need to change up this design, because I'm pretty sure I've used this same setup in every single video, but we saw how well that went with the green circuits. I'm also stealing some copper and leftover circuits from the other side to supplement it. And just because I can, I'm setting up concrete really early. I'll need this later anyway, and so might as well build it now and have enough to pave the entire base later. Okay, now it's finally time to get some crude oil. One thing that's a little annoying about the trigger technologies is I can't research refineries until I actually mine some crude oil, and that means dragging power all the way to the field just to pump out a little bit of it. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I prefer to handcraft all the refineries while I'm setting up the oil field. I'm still too lazy to set up a train, so big pipe here we come. Except after laying down several sections, it breaks. Ah yes, the new fluid mechanics. Now there's no such thing as flow limits through pipes, but if you make it too long you need to split it with a pump. Well, easy enough, and then I'm on my way. Speaking of new fluid mechanics, remember last video when I accidentally said the ratio of offshore pumps to boilers was 1 to 12? I was thinking of heat exchangers because I'm dumb, but that doesn't matter anyway because now the ratio is 1 to 200, and there's no pipe throughput limits anyway, so just make tons of boilers in a line. Now it's time to refine the oil, and the day I don't preemptively set up my refiners for the advanced oil processing recipe, you'll know that an imposter has taken over my channel. This is also why you want to automate making underground pipes. There's two products I need from petroleum gas: sulfur, which I can make with some of that water nearby, and plastic, which I can make with some of that coal nearby. I also made sulfuric acid while I was at it, and I like to imagine that while watching this you can play the game, how the hell is he moving all these products around, because I'm certainly not going to explain it. All we gotta do is combine all of that to get our chemical science, and so let's just route the engines straight through the circuits, because why not? Now to add in the sulfur, and then plug in the plastic into the red circuits, and that's everything. Just look at this beautiful mess. With this, technically we've got everything we need to get into space, since they changed all the rocket requirements, but I'm a bit of a traditionalist. The first thing I research is advanced oil processing, which will allow me to make heavy oil and light oil as well as petroleum gas. The light oil is especially useful for making solid fuel. My power demands have completely outstripped the output of my coal patch, so this is a good way to supplement it. It does mean less petroleum gas overall, but it's worth it to not need to worry about my power for now. I also need to set up oil cracking to deal with the excess oil, but even so, this recipe is still much more efficient at turning crude oil into petroleum gas, and with only one crappy field to our name, as well as burning a lot of our light oil, that's what we want. Now I can focus my attention to other things, like killing biters. I'll be using these explosives to explode things, and after a little sushi-mancy, I've got cannon shells up and running. The tank is a game changer for biter management, and it's even better now because you can control it remotely. That's right, even when you're off the planet, you can still deal with biters. You can't see it in the fog though, so make sure you've got lots of radars. Also, try to pay attention to where you're driving. With a tank, you can kill anything you want. Okay, I know for a fact that I'll need lots of blue circuits, so here's some extra circuit production. And this expansion is all about rockets, so here's some rocket fuel production. This build's nice and compact and uses light oil for solid fuel. Hopefully my steam power won't need too much light oil, but I don't plan on using boilers forever anyway. Next on my agenda are robots, and those take batteries, but first I'd like you to appreciate how I'm going to get the copper for that. Some people seem to struggle with this stuff, but after 4,000 hours, I feel like there's nothing this game can throw that will stop a sufficiently determined Dosh from getting things from point A to point B. Combine that with some sulfuric acid, and that's some batteries. Don't need too many of these, but I like to build extra just in case I want to spam accumulators later. Robot frames also take electric engines, and those take some lube, so here it is. One plant would be more than enough, but what else would I put in this space? Using the underground trick to split belts, I can yoink the engines from the chemical science build, then combine them with the electric circuits I stole from the advanced circuits build. That's all it takes to make electric engines. Then I'll steal some steel from the cannon shells. You might be noticing a pattern here. Those can go with the batteries, and then I'll just do this to get the circuits on the same belt as the electric engines. One electric engine assembler is enough to supply 2 frame assemblers, but I've got a few extra because a lot of random things take electric engines as an ingredient. That's all it takes to get robots, and I can leech off the nearby circuits to automate construction and logistics bots. I also want to automate their homes, so here's some Roboport automation. This is also great because that's 1/3 of yellow science done, which I've already got set up over here for when I finish the rest of it. I'm not really sure how the changes have affected circuit demand, but just to be safe, I'm building even more of them, and that includes another 24 advanced circuit assemblers. The number one thing new players struggle with is making enough advanced circuits, and that won't be me. Besides, even outside of science, there's plenty of uses for circuits, like modules. Then there's blue circuits, otherwise known as processing units. These very important blue boards take sulfuric acid and rivers worth of green circuits, but in return they give us yellow science and rockets. With rocket control units dead, these are all we need to make 1/3 of a rocket. Also, setting up some efficiency modules is great for reducing biter attacks on mining outposts by 80%, which is good because I've definitely been expanding my pollution cloud a little bit. Even though I'm already 2/3 done with yellow science, I'm switching to making purple science. And even though I've already got the bricks and stone set up elsewhere, that mine isn't long for the world, so I might as well set up some more brick furnaces, this time with electric furnaces. They're actually worse for pollution overall than steel furnaces if you're still using boilers for power, but because they have module slots, you can fix that by just shoving 2 efficiency modules inside. These bricks will be used exclusively for making electric furnaces, but now I actually need the stone to feed them. There's a mine over here, and I've got more than enough belts, so here we go. Apart from the bricks for furnaces, I'll also need some stone for the rails that purple science takes. The rails also take iron rods, and while I usually direct insert them because it's a 1:2 ratio on stick to rail assemblers, this time I'm just building them over here. I'll also go ahead and build the landing zone for purple science so I know what the footprint will look like. That leaves me with enough space to fit the productivity modules in here, which can leech off their green circuits and red circuits from the processing units. I've also got some speed modules in there because while they're not used in any science anymore, they're nice to have on hand. That leaves only the rails themselves, and apart from stones and sticks, they also take steel. Lots of it. If you're continually making science, rails account for something like 50% of all your steel consumption. They spit out so many rails, I feel like it's necessary to use the inserters formerly known as stack inserters. I think it's going to be quite a while before I get used to calling them bulk inserters, but that's everything for purple science. No time to celebrate though, because I want to finish up yellow science, and the astute viewer will know that that means building lots of low-density structures. Not only are they the final ingredient in yellow science, but they're also the final ingredient in rockets, of which we will be making many. However, they require tons of copper, and so that's why I'm setting up all these electric furnaces around here. They're a lot bulkier than the steel furnaces, but the advantage is they don't require a fuel belt and you can use modules and beacons to increase their speed. They're useless without actual ores, however, and while my starting copper patch might have been enough to get me to chemical science, turning on purple and yellow will increase my demand nearly fourfold. That's why I'm setting up even more mines. I sure love running massively long belts everywhere. Since my starting patch is running dry, I'll also use this to supplement the copper stacks up top. Such is the demand of low-density structures that this entire furnace array will be pretty much dedicated to them. Now I can build the LDS assemblers by copying the advanced circuit build multiple times, finally putting those construction bots to good use. Sometimes I'm lazy and appreciate the therapeutic nature of just building things by hand, but those lazy days are over. This run is officially ramping up. Also, I know that I said that this stack is exclusively for the LDS, but I'm stealing some of them to ensure that the second advanced circuit build has access to some copper. That's yellow science, purple science, and everything I'll need to launch a rocket. That's right, rocket control units are dead, completely gone. Now it's just LDS, rocket fuel, and processing units to build a rocket. Also, instead of 1,000 of each, it only takes 50. At least in Space Age, but that's because rockets are now a core part of your logistics. But here's my beautiful spaghetti square base. I'm not actually ready to launch the rocket yet because I need to find a place for the landing pad, and why not just cram it in here? I'm also setting up the lab so that they can accept the space science from below, but space science is a little different than you remember. First, though, my iron production from those two tiny mines is awful and not making enough steel for my low-density structures, so I've got to sort that out first. I've decided to use a train, thinking I'd tie it into a future rail network, but want to guess what never happened? Yeah, it's a lot of effort for a starter base, and why I usually just run belts, but whatever, I've got a train now, and enough iron to keep production at 100%. Thank you for your patience, because this is when Space Age officially begins. To get any farther, I've got to start making some space platforms, and they take tons of steel, which is also why I wanted to shore up my iron supply first. While those work, I should probably actually launch a rocket. But this time we're not just launching a rocket to win, we're launching a rocket to send up a space platform starter pack. Also, always fun to casually get the 8-hour rocket achievement when I'm not even trying. Here it is. Space. This is where we'll be making space science. Crazy, right? But we can't just fly up there and start building things. This is Space Age, not space exploration. In order to get anything up there, we'll need to launch a rocket, but they have very limited capacities. For example, a single rocket can only carry 50 pieces of platforming, and so building even something small will take dozens of rockets. The advantage? You can build anything remotely, and the animations are gorgeous. Everything to make space science comes from asteroids. They're just floating around aimlessly, and to get them we need these asteroid collectors. The actual science takes ice, carbon, and iron plates. Fortunately, the three types of asteroids, metallic, oxide, and carbonic, contain just that. Except to actually get it, we need to crush them first. Each one needs its own crusher, though with the ability to change recipes with circuits, you can actually get away with one if you really wanted to. This way is easier, though. The metallic asteroids only give iron ore, so we'll also want some furnaces up here. And you know what's really great? You don't need power poles in space. Yep, all you gotta do is place down some solar panels and everything is powered equally. I'm putting everything on a big sushi belt, where the inner lane will carry all the processed stuff, and the outer lane will handle all the raw asteroids. When you're doing this, make sure you remember to filter your furnace inserters, because otherwise you'll start accidentally making steel. Now, if we left it at this, the belts would get clogged up pretty fast, but thanks to the convenience of the new Read All Belts feature, I can get a constant update of everything on the belts in real time. If we've got too much of something, simply tell an inserter to dump it into space when it's over a certain amount. That's all it takes to get space science, and it's a great introduction, because this isn't the last we'll see of these platforms. Be grateful, because when I played at the LAN, space science took enriched uranium you had to ship in from Nauvis. The important thing is, we're stashing all of that science inside of the hub. That's important because now if I go to the landing pad and add in a request for space science, our little space platform will automatically send down what we want. Then I take it out of the landing pad and directly into the labs. Hooray! The best thing you can research with it is the logistics system. Yeah, it's space science now, but once you know what you're doing, space science isn't much harder than yellow science. It feels weird that I've got access to infinite research now, even though this is basically the early game. That's right, our goals lie on the other planets beyond. That being said, there's still a bunch of stuff on Nauvis I want to sort out. With requester chests, I can set up a bot mall, and I'm really tempted to build some kind of Omni mall that builds things on demand with a new ability to change assembler recipes with circuits, but one thing at a time. The main reason to automate things like this is that it gives bots access, and when we leave, we'll need to rely on our robots to handle everything in our absence. If I've got any dreams of leaving, I'll need thrusters. They'll let me turn any space brick into a moving space brick. I've also filled them with quality modules, one of the more controversial mechanics. With these in a machine, I've got a small chance to get an even better engine. It's only like 40% better for most uncommon things, but the asteroid collectors are a different story. Every level of quality gives them another arm, as well as makes them move faster. That's more than twice as good, so while it's not worth it at this early stage to go hard into the quality, asteroid collectors are an exception. The main fear keeping me here is biters. My power is still super stinky, and so I'd like to rectify that by switching to nuclear power. Actually being able to research uranium processing is a little annoying because now I need to mine one piece of uranium for the trigger tech, and that means running sulfuric acid all the way to a mine, when that's usually the last thing I do when setting up uranium processing. No matter, I'll get a bunch of these delicious green rocks and refine them into even better rocks. There's only a 0.7% chance to get enriched uranium, and that's what we mainly need to make power cells, so I'll just leave this running while I deal with everything else. Like clearing a bunch of biters out of my pollution cloud, and then securing another coal mine. Since what I really don't want to happen is for my plastic production to die while I'm off-planet because my starter patch ran out. My uranium is still processing, and that leaves us plenty of time to build the reactor. I don't have any of my blueprints in this pre-release build, but that's okay because the fluid changes have made them all obsolete anyway. The ratios are still pretty much the same, but what's different is not needing at least 4 separate water pipes or even a medium-sized reactor like this. Not only that, but the steam can share the same pipe as well. That means I've got a lot more freedom in my designs. Behold, the nuclear octagon. You can even hook the inserters up to the reactor directly and tell it to only insert new fuel when the temperature is below a certain level. Also, the new RGB lamps are amazing. Out of everything Space Age gave us, these are probably my favorite. I don't have enough for Kovrax enrichment yet, but now that the reactors won't waste all of it, I can load it with a couple handmade fuel cells. And just like that, my power is totally clean. Thanks, nuclear. Before you can actually go to another planet, you need to research its discovery. I've decided to go to Vulcanus first, and while there's nothing stopping me from attaching thrusters to my space science platform, I'd rather just make another one. What's really amazing is that if you set your rocket silos to auto-request, all you need to do is place down ghosts and your rockets will automatically ship up all the supplies it needs to build everything. Of course, the speed at which you receive shipments is limited by the number of available silos. To generate thrust, you need to pump fuel and an oxidizer into your thrusters. The fuel inputs are offset, and you intentionally can't flip them because otherwise every ship would be a boring line of thrusters. The fuel and oxidizer takes carbon and iron ore, plus some water which you can get from melting ice. Naturally, everything comes from asteroids, or at least it should. One annoying thing is that the crushers have a small chance to output the same asteroid that you tried to crush, so you need to filter the output and make sure you've got an extra inserter to spit out the uncrushed asteroid. Sushi belts really are the easiest way to deal with all this stuff. Now, if I'm not making space science, you might wonder why I'm building all these furnaces, and that's because space wants to kill us. There are tons of rocks, and once you get moving, they're more than happy to destroy your entire platform. That's why we're destroying them first, and the easiest way to do that is to shoot them. All of this iron will go directly into ammo production. You can use rockets to ship in tons of red ammo or even uranium ammo and feed everything that way, but when the speedrunners beat the game at the LAN event without making anything on the platform, it made Kovrax sad, so I'm going to be making everything necessary for the defense on site. Also, really taking advantage of being able to move ammunition between turrets. This is an alright amount of ammo production, and unfortunately you didn't get to see all the failures at the LAN that led to this knowledge. Anyway, I've got one side dedicated to ore and the other side for plates. No circuits necessary, but the belts that hold the asteroids can still back up. I used several inserters last time, but here's how to keep the belt clean with only one. If you read the whole belt, put that into a constant combinator that's set to let through each signal when it's greater than whatever limit you want, and then use that output to set the filters of your inserter, you've got a system that will only pick up items that are over the amount you've set. Genius! I highly recommend putting efficiency modules in everything for your first ship, and though they're only 40% better, these uncommon solar panels can help save you some space. In space. That's everything, so time for the Pioneer's maiden voyage. Before you go into space, you need to drop everything but your armor and guns, because according to the game, the engineer weighs exactly 1 ton. I mean, he can carry nuclear reactors in his pocket, what did you expect? Alright, here we go. And apparently, 2 assemblers isn't enough. Okay, have some speed modules and faster inserters. There we go. It is so satisfying watching these things go. I just love staring at the grabby arms of the asteroid collectors. But pretty soon, we've arrived at our destination, Vulcanus. Yes, I know an entire planet being only 15,000 kilometers away doesn't make much sense, but don't question it. What's important is that we've landed on another planet. It's full of lava and rocks, and there's no iron or copper ore in sight. Since you aren't allowed to bring your inventory with you, we're completely empty-handed. It is possible to start from nothing on these planets, but why would I do that when I could just ship in some raw materials? If I send them up from Nauvis and then fly all the way out here, I can drop them from orbit. Sending everything would be a bit of a waste, but a few thousand raw materials will speed up your efforts to colonize things significantly. Oh yeah, and bring some personal construction bots. Now to figure out what the heck we're supposed to do in order to get this planet's science. Well, there's lots of rocks around, and over here sulfuric acid seems to be leaking from the ground, so that's a good place to start. Solar panels on Vulcanus are a lot better than on Nauvis, so some solar panels will give us some starting power. The first of the trigger technologies wants me to make tungsten carbide. I've got everything it takes from smashing rocks into burnt-out trees, so all it takes from there is a little sulfuric acid. That unlocked the ability to make foundries, and scanning through here it lets me use lava to create iron and copper. That's great, but actually making the foundries is another thing. I'm going to need a lot more of this stuff, so I decided to move shop up to the coal patch over here. Acid and coal will make the carbon they take, but the only source of the tungsten ore is rocks. For now. The foundries also take lubricant, and that means making heavy oil. There's no water or crude oil here, but there is this recipe that can turn calcite, acid, and coal into heavy oil. Calcite is another unique resource on Vulcanus. We won't need much of this stuff, so I'm just moving it by hand. There we are, that's all we need, except refined concrete. You can make it here, but it's a pain, so I recommend just bringing it in from Nauvis as well. Okay, so foundries are actually insane. I made this in an ordinary assembler, but if you're smart, you'll immediately toss that out and start making foundries in foundries, because foundries have a productivity bonus that gives you 50% more foundry per foundry, and considering the only source of tungsten we can get right now are the rocks on the ground, we want to stretch that as much as possible. But there's tungsten ore right here, you might ask. Why not just mine it? Well, first off, only big mining drills can, and second off, it's because it's inside this guy's territory. If you build anything in their territory, they're going to be pissed, and I would not recommend taking the demolishers lightly. No, we've got to be content with our starting area for now. By the way, at the LAN, the starting area was accidentally generated with worm territory as well. It's as fun as you can imagine. Anyway, with the foundries, I can suck lava out of the ground with offshore pumps, then turn it into molten metal. It just needs a little bit of calcite as a catalyst, but apart from that, it's completely infinite iron and copper. It spits out stone as a byproduct, but if you didn't think Vulcanus could get any better, we can just get rid of it by throwing it into the lava. Though might as well make some bricks with it. My power sucks right now, and each one of these foundries takes 2.5 megawatts to run, so using efficiency modules is pretty much the only way I can get these things to work right now. The first foundry makes molten iron or copper, and from there you can turn that into not only plates, but loads of other stuff as well. You can even turn molten iron directly into steel. My main focus is getting some supplies set up so that I don't need to ship everything in from Nauvis anymore, so here's some circuits. We'll be using fluids a lot, but fortunately we can make pipes directly from molten iron. There's some inserters, and since my power is abysmal, a bunch of solar panels. That also means some accumulators, but making batteries is easy when there's free sulfuric acid everywhere. My power dies every night, but I've just got to live with that until I can get enough solar power. In the meantime, I'm missing the most important ingredient for building a base, and that's belts. But not only can I make gears directly from molten iron, I can also make the belts themselves in foundries. Don't forget, each of these foundries is giving me 50% extra for free. Hello there. There's no pollution on this planet, so as long as we don't build in their territory, this guy will leave us alone. Just don't accidentally build a single corner in there, or they'll go on a warpath and take out your whole base. I need more foundries, and this is why you bring robots. Can you imagine trying to mine all these rocks by hand? Okay, even with a boost here, solar power still sucks, but fortunately I've noticed this acid neutralization recipe. Just a little calcite will turn 1,000 sulfuric acid into a whopping 10,000 units of steam. That's 2,000 per second. And with a steam turbine taking only 60 per second, a single chemical plant running this recipe will make enough to power 33 steam turbines. That's almost 200 megawatts. That's like half of my nuclear reactor on Nauvis out of one building. Obviously it drinks acid, but we get that stuff for free. So yeah, screw solar, we're going acid steam all the way. By the way, once you're down here, there's no way to get back until you've built a rocket, but I can still move my platform back and forth to get certain items. I brought a bunch of logistic spots so I can use all these raw materials to make the real base. Also, don't make fun of me for using this terrible concrete recipe here. I didn't realize you could make concrete in foundries. Okay, our real base will require an actual tungsten mine, and there's no getting around to needing to kill one of these things. Everyone has their own special method, but the one I've chosen is shipping in a bunch of uranium ammo. No small feat considering you can only move 25 magazines per rocket, but since these worms have such insane HP regeneration, what you really need is burst damage, and this'll do it. Those explosions they summon are a little scary, but that'll take care of the small ones. Now I've just got to secure the tungsten patch. There's one more I want to take care of so I can get access to even more acid and calcite. But let this be a lesson for anyone underestimating them. I was trying to lure it into the guns, but stepped too far into their slowing cloud and exploded. This walk of shame really makes me appreciate power armor and exoskeletons. Unfortunately for the worm, round 2 didn't end nearly as well. Alright, now all I'm missing are big mining drills. They take electric engines and advanced circuits, so that's another thing I'm shipping in. I think a lot of players are going to lose hours simply because they didn't realize that you can just bring in whatever you need as long as you have a functional platform. They can also be made in foundries for a free 50% more mining drills. And since I've got everything in provider chests, I'm to the point where I can just set up any new supplies I need remotely. Calcite is required for pretty much everything, but you need so little of it that this amount of miners is perfectly fine. Also, just one of these big mining drills is 5 times as fast as a regular mining drill. Not only that, but they drain the ore patch they're on half as fast and have a huge mining radius. Just like foundries, they are amazing. I'll just bring all that down here and start setting up the real base. Since I've got tons of power, I don't need to skimp out on the foundries anymore. This is probably overkill on the lava to molten metal recipe, seeing as one of these can support 2.5 plate foundries, but who cares? Everything on Vulcanus is basically free anyway. It's generally good to build these next to lava, not because of the fluid input, but because it means less distance to cover to obliterate all the stone it spits out. Funny how the planet without any water gives you the access to infinite landfill. Oh yeah, and you can't use underground belts or pipes to go through lava, so don't even try. You can't build over the lava, at least until the end game, so all of your stone disposal inserters will end up all over the place. I've got all the molten metal I could ever want, so now I've got to get some sulfuric acid. I've got that gigantic field right next to the calcite mine, so that seems like the obvious choice. Setting up pump jacks is always fun. Moving it with pipes makes it a little bit too long, so I've got to use a pump to split it, but a pump has a flow limit of 1,200 units per second, when those pump jacks are definitely making more than that. Here's how to bypass that. Just add even more pumps. I definitely won't need 14,000 units of acid per second, but it's the thought that counts. Next, I'll need some coal. It's very important, and the starting patch is pretty small, but this is when I'm thankful for the reduced resource drain on the big drills. It'll make this 700k patch last as long as a 1.4 million one. Last thing I need is some tungsten, and that requires...
Tungsten carbide drills?
Unlike the other resources, tungsten has a mining time of 500%, meaning that these fancy drills will mine no better than our crappy old ones. That's why I'm building a lot more of these than I did for the other resources. Before, I made tungsten carbide purely for the foundries and the big mining drills, but now I need to make it on an industrial scale. And all that starts with a coal and sulfuric acid to make carbon. Since everything on this planet is so cheap, it's go big or go home, and so I chose an amount that'll comfortably consume the entire output of that tungsten patch. The ratio of carbon to carbide is roughly 1:1, so this'll take care of it. I don't know why, but seeing purple ores makes me feel funny. But in a good way. Anyway, despite my best efforts, some biters have expanded into my pollution cloud. I try to take them out with a remotely driven tank, but this is why you want to set up radars everywhere. You can shoot things like this, but without being able to see, this is pretty much inevitable. Instead, I'll just put up some big laser poles around my base and call it a day. I've got more important things to be doing. That would be making tungsten plates. They also take tungsten ore, so I've got to split that between my carbide production. And despite being made in the incredibly powerful foundry, I'm still gonna need a ton of these. Well, not exactly need, but I want this many, and that's a good enough reason for me. They also take molten iron, but I've got that in spades. I wonder how long it'll take someone to make a mod that causes your pipes of molten iron to solidify into iron blocks if you don't heat them. Now you may have noticed that all my lights are yellow, and that's just the mood lighting. At the LAN event, Irindel joined our team and started placing colored lamps all over Aquilo, and so I've decided to honor that memory. At this point, that's all it takes to get the science. Yup, just carbide and plates, as well as a splash of molten copper. And just this production I've got here is good for at least 1,000 bottles per minute. That's before modules or anything, so yeah, foundries are insane. There's our metallurgical science, but maybe you've remembered something important. Actually getting it to Nauvis. Yeah, I don't exactly have a rocket yet, so we're not done here. However, I have shipped in everything it takes to make a silo, as well as the processing units, fuel, and low-density structures to make the rocket itself. This is a good way to get off a planet before you set up the full base, but we still want to automate these. For now, I'm setting up a few thousand bottles of science so that my ship can bring them back to Nauvis. It's slow going, but after a short trip, adding a request to the cargo pad, and changing the filters, I've got some science in my labs. Now I can research the one tech I've been waiting for. It's coal liquefaction. Normally, this was an incredibly niche recipe, but here on Vulcanus, it's a lifesaver. That other recipe to make heavy oil was incredibly wasteful compared to the real deal, and so I don't want to set up something that would be outdated the moment I got a single batch of science planet-side. Getting light oil and petroleum gas is absolutely necessary for building rockets, and this is how we're gonna do it. Just like we can power our entire base with steam, we can also condense that back into water using a bunch of chemical plants. This is how we're gonna get all that water we need for the oil refining on a planet with no water. That leaves setting up the liquefaction itself, which isn't that different from normal advanced oil refining, except that you need an extra belt to input the coal. Now check this out. Yeah, I just flipped all the fluid outputs. Those of you who have only joined after 2.0 will never know how incredible this is. Oh yeah, it also takes steam and heavy oil instead of water and crude oil, but we've got plenty of both. Also, it still spits out all three, but it makes way more heavy oil than the regular refining, so that means even more cracking plants. This is what we need all that water for, but I'm sure you get the idea. Also, I'll need a little bit of this, so here's a random sulfur plant. From there, I'm just gonna copy the entire rocket fuel build off of Nauvis and call it a day. It's not an optimal build, but not building it again is an optimal use of my time. That covers 1/3 of the rocket, and for the other 2/3 we need plastics. It also eats coal, and between this, the liquefaction, and the carbide, you can see why I was really excited about draining that coal patch half as fast. The main thing I need are circuits, and that requires turning some of our molten metal into plates. Using foundries is so relaxing, especially with the new fluid mechanics. Just using pipes is way easier than inserters and belts. Pretty much all of this will be for circuits, and I don't want you to make fun of me because I completely forgot that you can use foundries to make copper wire directly from molten copper, so making it into plates was completely unnecessary, but whatever. It's not so easy to beat out like 7 years of intuition making circuits. I can also reuse my advanced circuit build from Nauvis. Once again, this is only possible thanks to construction bots and all those supplies I automated before building all of this. Then that just leaves the processing units. This may seem like overkill considering I'm not making any yellow science here, but I'm going to be using all of these for building rockets, but we'll get there. I'm glad they removed rocket control units because now I appreciate not needing to build another 100 assemblers making speed modules. The last ingredient is low-density structures, and much like the copper cable recipe I should have used, I can make them entirely in a foundry. It's just so convenient. Instead of needing to make tons of steel and copper plates, I can just pump molten iron and copper into them directly. The only item input are the plastic bars I've already set up. And once again, forget how convenient it is, I'm also getting another 50% for free simply from using the foundries. Parts of me expected there to be an engine recipe in the foundry, but nope, we've got to make those the old-fashioned way. The only reason to make these here is for electric engines, which are used to fully automate big mining drills, additional robots, as well as rocket silos. Because of that, I can just put them all in a requester chest and forget about them. I also made some tier 1 modules and some cliff explosives, but everything's looking good. There's one last thing I want to take care of, automating transport belts. I've been using red belts up until now, but this is Vulcanus, and they have something even better. I didn't even automate blue belts on Nalvis because I've had my eye on these the entire time. The legendary green belts. They move at 60 items per second and can only be made on Vulcanus. But first I've got to automate all the other belts, and the molten iron to gear recipe being incredibly convenient once again. The turbo belts take tungsten plates instead of iron gears like everything else, and while that will cut into our science production, I think this base makes more than enough. You know, these were called tungsten belts before the full release. As we all know, it's not a real base unless it's got concrete and lamps, so I'm doing what I should have done ages ago and making concrete in a foundry. Unfortunately, you can't make refined concrete in a foundry, so I've got to set up some other foundries to make the steel and iron rods, once again straight from molten iron. I kind of overestimated my refined concrete reserves and got a bit overzealous and started painting everything with concrete, making the alerts flash not enough materials for like 2 hours straight. I've got some rockets building though. This whole base is pretty much done and set up to be completely autonomous. The science will be held in boxes next to the silos so that the bots can shove it into the rockets on demand. I've only got one ship right now, but I'd like one dedicated entirely to Vulcanus. Fortunately, I can simply copy my entire ship, create a new space platform, and as soon as the starter pack is launched, paste my entire blueprint and sit back while the entire thing is built automatically. Damn, it feels good to automate. But I do make some adjustments to the amount of ammo production. While that builds, I make even more rocket silos, because having tons of rocket silos at hand will be extremely useful for shipping things into space. Since turbo belts can only be made on Vulcanus, the only way to get them to other planets is by a rocket, and you're really encouraged to set up a ton of rockets like this, because a single one can only carry 50 belts. I'll also want foundries for other planets, and those are only 5 per launch, so yeah, get comfortable building rockets. This ship survived its maiden voyage, and up until now I've been adding requests on the planet, but now I can add a request in the space platform and watch as my Logibots swarm to load up the rockets with my beautiful science bounties. And 6 rockets is already struggling, so here's even more. Ah, Vulcanus. What a beautiful planet. Vulcanus was the Roman god of fire and the forge, and looking at this, it's definitely fitting. Well, but there's nothing more for me to do here, so now I've got to get back to that boring old Nalvis. But I've brought back with me turbo belts, cliff explosives, big miners, and foundries. As if welcoming me back, not 2 seconds after landing, my iron train is under attack. Yeah, I missed you too, biters. So back on Nalvis, there's not really much for me to do aside from blast apart some biters that have shown up. The one thing I want to do is research artillery, which is now locked behind Vulcanus. If I've got artillery cannons, I'll be able to deal with biters as they expand into my pollution while I'm off the planet much easier. The artillery shell recipe is a lot more annoying in Space Age, however, because it takes calcite and tungsten plates. They still only stack to 1, so you're better off shipping in the raw materials. Also, I'm going to paste that entire coal liquefaction build here, because my oil is coming from one puny patch that's down to like 1/10 of its original richness. I have effectively infinite coal because I can bring in the big mining drills and fill 3 belts effortlessly. I love these things. And anytime I need more, I can just send the ship on over to get them. And then my entire power grid dies. Seeing as I need power to make power, that's pretty catastrophic. But thankfully I've still got some crappy solar sitting around and enough lingering charge in the roboports to get a bot to sever the electric networks. Turns out rocket silos are pretty power hungry, but adding some beacons to the steam machine will fix everything. The new logistics groups are amazing for these ships, because it can neatly organize all the stuff I want to grab from Vulcanus, disable certain groups, and even choose which planets it's allowed to request things from. The space platforms are great. Anyway, I really wish I made more than 2 rocket silos, even for a base this small, but eventually I've stocked up everything I'll need to conquer the next planet. I've chosen Fulgora next, and so off we go. You get a lot more solar power in space, but Fulgor is further away from the sun, meaning that these ships that worked perfectly heading towards Vulcanus are suddenly running out of power, but some more solar will fix that. Well, here we are. Time to jettison all my garbage onto the surface and head down. There's plenty of things I forgot, but I'll just send for them later. Welcome to Fulgora, or as I like to call it, the Trash Planet, because it's covered in trash. Also an endless ocean of heavy oil and nightly lightning storms, but mostly trash. This trash is all that's left of the previous inhabitants. But now I'm here to turn their legacy into rocket components. There's tons of islands, but right now we're looking for something specific. We're looking for the Fulgoran Vault Ruins, and after several minutes of running around, I've found one. Apparently they were hiding some blueprints in there because digging this thing up gives us the insights to craft recyclers. I was the first person to set foot on Fulgora at the event. I was so excited to get to a new planet that I flew over here on OSHA's Nightmare and got stranded with nothing and had to start from nothing, which was quite the experience. We're not doing that this time. I've got loads of raw supplies, as well as ships that can comfortably traverse the space without exploding. After wandering around, I've found this island, which has some nice scrap patches and enough flat land to get a decent little operation going. Clearing up the ruins is a little time-consuming, even with bots, but no one said it would be easy. I really appreciate how you can see what looks like roads on the map. The unique thing about Fulgor is that unless you've got these lightning rods protecting you, you and all of your buildings are at risk of getting struck by lightning. But they'll do more than just protect you against lightning, they can also harness it. Every time they're struck, it sends a short but strong burst of power into the network. That short burst isn't good for much, but if you've got tons of accumulators, you can store the whole thing as potential energy that you can then dole out steadily. Also, the lightning collectors take stone bricks, which I didn't bring, so here's some furnaces. I've also flown out my Vulcanus ship so that it can drop a ton of turbo belts. But the best thing I can bring out by far are these big mining drills. Scrap has a mining time of 50%, meaning that one of these will output a whole 5 scrap per second. And paired with these turbo belts, I'll be able to get a ton of throughput in a relatively tiny space. And now I will reveal my plans for Fulgora. When I was first here, I tried to handle everything with belts, but I've seen the light since the LAN. By recycling scrap, we have a chance to get any of this stuff, and so sorting it out is an enormous headache. That's why we're just gonna make robots do it. By simply making it output directly into a chest, we can stockpile everything and make it available to the robots to grab on demand. It might not be pretty, but it works. It's also extremely easy to scale up. This is why I brought 500 logistics bots with me. The power suddenly going out reminds me what planet I'm on, and so I shove some efficiency modules into everything and then start setting up accumulator automation. Batteries are a potential result from scrap, but in order to get the iron plates they take, we need to recycle even further beyond. Recyclers not only chew up scrap, but they can also break most items into their constituent components, but only recovers 25% of them. That means if we shove iron gears into one, we have a chance of getting back iron plates. By the way, iron gears were a lot less common when I first played, but I can only imagine that the developers saw me waiting around a single mining drill assembler for 30 minutes and decided to buff the scrap returns. Oh yeah, I've also automated recyclers, but they just take things that scrap outputs naturally. To upgrade your power on Fulgora, you both need more square acreage to collect more lightning bolts, as well as the accumulators to store it. I couldn't tell you the ratios because whenever I needed more power, I just pasted more of these. The true engineering way. In order to make actual progress, I need to make holmium plates. Holmium ore is an uncommon pull from scrap and the basis of all electromagnetic science. But first we need to melt some ice cubes and turn it into holmium solution, along with some stone. Making the holmium plates is really easy, since it just takes the solution, but this is why I really wanted to go to Vulcanus first. I can use a foundry and get an extra 50% for free. After making 50 plates, we unlock the mysteries of the electromagnetic plant. It takes some of those plates, as well as some refined concrete. You can get regular concrete from scrap, but you gotta make the refined stuff yourself, which is easily achieved by bots. It also takes some recycled iron plates. What's funny is you get processing units and advanced circuits, but if you want regular green circuits, you gotta break down reds or blues. Everything's backwards on this planet. Just like the foundries, the electromagnetic plant has an extra 50% productivity for free, so as soon as I've crafted one in an assembler, all subsequent ones will be made in the electroplant itself. Having these automated will make the rest of the base pretty easy, as well as using all of these bots to set up another mall just like I did on Vulcanus. Already you can see the swarm gathering. I cannot stress enough just how convenient it is to have everything you need on site. Before I start setting up the science, I'm going ahead and pasting another space platform. It'll take my rockets like an hour to send up enough stuff to finish building it, and that's why I'm doing it now. I'm also horrified to realize that I haven't even made any science yet, and I've already depleted half of that 300k scrap patch. And that's even including the big mining drill's reduced drain rate. Fulgora eats scrap like crazy. Well, to help organize things, I swap out the passive provider chests with active provider chests, as well as a ton of storage chests. Basically, it just means that the bots will remove anything the recyclers output and shove it into storage, which has the extra benefit of sorting them automatically and quite neatly. Again, if you don't use Logibot swarms on Fulgora, you're basically playing on hard mode. Probably in an effort to encourage you to actually automate them, accumulators are used in electromagnetic science, and so I've got to make even more of them. I'll also want some water, and with pipes having effectively infinite throughput, there's no reason I shouldn't just melt all my ice and feed it into one pipe. What I'm doing now is basically just what I was doing before, but more. Everything's handled with robots, so to make a belt of holmium ore and stone, I just need 2 requester chests opposite each other, but there's even more holmium solution. After a while, I'm getting to the point where I'll need to actually worry about things overflowing my storage, but I'll handle that with even more recyclers. Everything in storage is also in the logistics network, so by reading a roboport, I can get a real-time level of everything in the chests. Now it's just a matter of feeding that into a decider combinator to output a signal when it's over a certain amount. Then I can plug that signal into a requester chest and set it to Set Requests mode. Now they'll only request LDS to be destroyed when I've got more than I want. I still need only 1 foundry for the plates, but the next thing I need is this electrolyte. It also takes some of our holmium solution, as well as some heavy oil, but we've literally got an ocean of that stuff. Then it takes some stone, but again, bots handle everything and it's only a chest away. Also, you may have noticed that I'm using the appropriate mood lighting here as well. Next, I'll need a little light oil, and since I've only got access to heavy oil, I'll need to crack that down with some water. The light oil is used to make superconductors, along with copper plates and plastic bars. Neither of those come from scrap, but both can come from recycling low-density structures, which I've already set up 2 paragraphs ago. Both of these and the supercapacitors take holmium plates. The capacitors themselves take that electrolyte, as well as batteries, the conductors, and green circuits, which again come from breaking apart processing units. Making those is what actually unlocks the ability to make the electromagnetic science, and all that takes is that, the accumulators, and the 2 fluids that we're already using to make the other stuff. This is a pretty small operation, so I've only made enough to support 3 electromagnetic plants making science. It's much harder to scale up here than on Vulcanus, but this should be more than enough to get me started. Don't be afraid to make small builds like this just to get the science. I don't think I recycle enough scrap to generate the holmium ore necessary to satisfy this level of production constantly, but I've still got a ton stockpiled. It's only been a couple hours and I've already nearly blown through that first patch, so here's even more scrap mining. This won't last long either. I want to make rocket silos, but for some reason I have 0 steel. I should be getting it from breaking apart LDS, but I've got no idea where it's all going. My supply is like refined concrete, presumably, but I need more, so I set up these furnaces to start making steel if I've got spare iron plates and not enough steel plates. Regardless, this is all it takes to make a pretty decent supply of science here. Obviously, I'm missing the rockets, but you know the best thing about Fulgora? You get like 98% of a rocket for free. Recycling scrap gives you processing units, low-density structures, and solid fuel. Sure, it doesn't give you the rocket fuel, but when you've got the solid fuel, the amount of light oil you actually need to turn that into rocket fuel is basically nothing. See, my mega base, where I was making over 10,000 science per minute with only like 15 refineries actually making light oil. The biters on Nauvis are annoying me again, but this time I can take care of them remotely by dropping shells on them. I am so glad that the artillery remote isn't an item that you need to keep in your inventory anymore. Rocket silos are notoriously power-hungry, so here's even more accumulators. And I'm worried about overflowing on even more items, so I've set up even more recycling to take out the excess. I'm about ready to leave, but before I go, I want to set up even more scrap mines. There's some more over here, and now for the first time, I'm using elevated rails. They're the only way to transport things between islands. Even things like robot networks can hardly span the distance, so you can forget about power poles. But fortunately, power is just there in the air, and all I gotta do is stamp down this island's own collection network. This'll keep me going for a while longer, and I won't need more than this one station for going back and forth, so no signals necessary. Just a double-headed train and 2 stations. The elevated rails are kinda fun to ride, and now I've got some mines that'll last me for 2 hours or something. But I'll cross that bridge when I get there. The rockets are ready, and the Fulgora ship is finished and on its way, so I'm pretty much done here. I might come back and build it up later, but this is enough science for now. Time to escape this trash planet and sail for brighter and hopefully less viscous shores. Most importantly, I'm going to do it with a few thousand bottles of electromagnetic science. My labs don't have any room left on the belt, so I'll just insert all this manually. A little annoying, but this base isn't long for the world anyway, and that's not only because the next planet is Gleba and I don't want to go there yet, it's because I've got everything I need to build the real base. That starts off with clearing all the natives off my land so I can cover it with concrete like I'm some kind of movie villain. Then that continues with setting up mines to get raw resources. To maximize throughput, I want to put power poles between the big mining drills, but a power pole isn't long enough to perfectly span the distance. But that's when I had an epiphany. Just make uncommon power poles. Seriously, I cannot recommend this enough. Just the uncommon ones are way better and they're so easy to make. Yeah, you only have like a 10% chance to make one, but power poles are so cheap it's hardly a problem. And now that I've gone to Fulgora, I can just recycle any of the boring power poles. For how easy all this is, I really do recommend it. After that, I spent literally 2 hours just thinking about how I wanted to handle my new base, and that usually begins with the rail network. With the new elevated rails, you can make it so that trains almost never need to slow down, so I've decided to use one-to-one trains. Yes, last video was mega trains, but now this one's mini trains. So if you never could figure out chain signals in intersections, good news, because with the new elevated rails, you won't need to make 2 trains intersect ever. This setup will allow trains to either enter or exit the split without ever interrupting the through traffic, and I've randomly decided that I want to make nothing but elevated junctions for this new base. And you want to know what I just realized? Tanks have equipment grids now, and you can put exoskeletons inside of them to make them drive faster. I can only assume that they're running between the treads Flintstone style. Back to the rails, I haven't talked about it much, but the new half-curve and half-diagonal rails are amazing. Your designs can be so much more freeform now, and you can plan out entire massive sections from the map alone, making connecting 2 sections with the shortest path a breeze. I've already made the design for that iron mine, and they're roughly the same size, so now for the copper, all I gotta do is copy it. I'm not sure if I'll want to continue this track from here, but might as well plan for the junction already. I know what you're thinking, so don't say it. Then I'll just get the other resources like, coal. Here's another intersection I designed to split into a 45-degree angle. Again, it's only splits and mergers, no actual intersections. And now for the stone mine. I am really liking how easy it is to make rails across long distances. I think perfectly straight city block blueprints are going to be a lot less appealing with how easy it is now. Thanks to the new rail sections, I'm a lot more comfortable making my tracks only 2 spaces apart instead of the usual 4. Now, while I've been setting all this up, something very special has been researching in the background, and after spending 5,000 Fulgoran science packs on it, it's finally here. I've got to go back to Fulgora to get it, though. Hasn't changed a bit, but down to business. I've got to throw in my old Mark II power armor, but in return it gives me mech armor. Not only is it better in every stat than my old armor, it also does this. Yeah, they fly now. Whenever you try to walk into an obstacle that ordinarily would have blocked you, now you'll automatically fly over it. Back in my day, we needed Spidertrons to do that. This is definitely the main benefit of Fulgora, and now I will never step out of this metal sarcophagus ever. But how about I reveal my plans for the real base now? You know how everything on Vulcanus is great because you can use foundries and liquid metal to take care of everything? Wouldn't it be nice if we could do that on Nauvis? The only problem is there's no lava. Except, there is another recipe to get molten iron. It takes iron ore and calcite. Well, there's no calcite on Nauvis either, but it only takes 1 chunk to get 112 plates worth of molten iron, so shipping it in via rocket is definitely viable. To handle all the iron ores, I've got these stations that the trains can roll into from either direction without needing to intersect or stop. This was definitely overkill, but I've never played with these recipes before, and so I wasn't really sure what kind of throughput I needed. It's easy to forget that only 50 of these belts requires an entire rocket when I'm building them like this, but that's why I made a Vulcanus so robust. The last station will be for the calcite, while all the others will be for the raw ores. I'm making 6 foundries per turbo belt, and since they've changed the beacon mechanics to make it so that having a single beacon is much more powerful than it used to be, I'm only fitting in 1. Now instead of moving around plates, it'll be much more convenient to move around the molten metal to where I need it, so all of this stuff is going to be pumped into tanks and loaded into fluid wagons. Loading fluids is much easier than items, and since they reduced the flow rate of pumps, I'm making sure that I'm using all 3 pumps to maximize throughput. That's pretty much everything. Now I've just got to copy this whole thing for the molten copper. I say this every video, and I've already said it this one as well, but you really want to set up a proper supply hub, because pasting something like this and having it just appear is amazing. I'll finish this up later, because the only raw resource I haven't set up yet is oil. And look at those fancy new graphics. This is when they officially updated the game to 2.0, but anyway, pump jacks. It's still crazy that I can just fly over the water like this. It's also crazy that the fluid loading stations don't need the pumps and the tanks to be directly connected for maximum throughput anymore, making these narrow stations more than just a dream. And one field definitely isn't enough, so here's another one. I've decided to put all the oil processing down here, and I spent way too long trying to make a junction for this half-diagonal section before finally deciding that it's impossible to make it not look like trash because the ramps are restricted to horizontal and vertical orientations. Anyway, the unloading of crude oil is going to look a whole lot like the loading of it. Without flow limitations, tanks only exist to hold fluid. That might not sound like crazy, but back in the day they were pivotal in fluid management. I've got this lake nearby to supply all of my water, but I'm pretty sure you've seen enough oil refining to get the idea. I'm once again using the mirror feature to make this build more compact. And moving on to setting up the oil cracking, the only notable thing about this build is that I was streaming a bit of it to my patrons, and so I wasn't slacking around as much as usual. That's why everything is going up in a matter of minutes. I'm designing everything as ghosts because I can simply connect to the robot networks when I want to actually build it. You need coal for making plastic, which I want to do here, so here's some coal stops as well. Apart from making plastic, I'm also going to set up some coal liquefaction. There's barely any good oil fields around here, but with the power of the big mining drills I can get tons of coal, so this will be a good supplement to the crude oil supply. I can feed the results through the same oil cracking build. Now to make the plastic. I'm a little hesitant to make a super serious build because there's something I'll unlock later that'll make this whole thing look like a joke, but I'll need plastic to get that far, so still gotta build it. Then other notable oil products include rocket fuel. Even though this isn't strictly used to make science anymore, it's tangentially used to make science. By now you shouldn't need me to tell you that being able to build lots of rockets is good. You may have noticed that I'm leaving spaces 3 wide between all the buildings, and that's because I might want to fit in beacons later. I'm not really going hard into the beacons this run, but it's good to have the option. You may also recall that coal liquefaction takes steam, and I'm going to solve that by giving it its own personal nuclear reactor. It's not like making fuel cells is hard. Anyway, anything I make over here is going to need its own train stop to bring it elsewhere, so here's where all the rocket fuel is going to be picked up. Moving it by train is a lot better now that they doubled the stack size. There's a couple more oil products I want to make here, namely sulfuric acid. The only problem is that it takes iron plates. However, since I'll have tons of trains filled with molten iron buzzing around, it'll be no problem to make one stop here and to feed a couple foundries. Then there's the actual sulfur. It takes petroleum gas and water, and half of this stuff will be for the sulfuric acid, while the other half will go onto a train to be brought to the chemical science build, as soon as I actually build it. Anyway, that's about everything, except for the plastic stop. Since plastic is a lot more in demand than anything else around here, I'm also going to give it a higher throughput design. But if I'm gonna be honest, I don't think I'll need it. I'm mostly practicing at this point. Now that I'm finished, I just looked over at my molten copper build and realized that I pasted it 2 tiles offset from the iron build above. Now some of you might be fine with this, but this level of psychological torture would kill most Factorians, so I'm going to fix it. It'll take the bots a while, but it's not like I pay them. While that's going on, I'll also make them work overtime by building out the entire oil area. It's a good thing robots can't unionize. I decide to turn on the mine so that their buffers can fill up while I'm working. And it's remarkable how much pollution they spew out. It makes things like this pretty much inevitable. Obviously, I'm gonna need to deal with these biters later. But I'd just like to mention how much I enjoy piecing together this new rail network. There's just something about the elevated rails that make them feel that much more special. Time to build the main base. This might not seem like much, but because of the sheer amount of molten metal I can move, each one of these train stops represents like 12 blue belts of iron plates in classic Factorio. Because of that, just this can be the basis of my entire base. This is the reason I waited until now. With foundries and electromagnetic plants, I can completely replace assemblers in making the most important products of all, circuits. Just one foundry for both iron and copper cable is enough to feed an electro plant. Even with minimal beaconing, just this can fully saturate a green belt. Plus, it's all fed with fluids, and basically prints circuits from nothing. I'll just go ahead and make a ton of these. Okay, for the red circuits, I spent way too long messing around with alternative designs, and they all ended up a little bit too deranged for my liking. So I went with what was basically my old design with the newer buildings instead. It's notable because it requires rare medium power poles to reach past the 4x4 electroplants, but throwing away 99 power poles to get one rare is a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Now I've got to tack on some plastic stops, but after that I'll just paste a bunch of these designs I made in the lab. I actually have no idea what kind of circuit demand I'll actually end up with, so clearly overbuilding everything is the most rational solution. Also, I'm glad that you can just paste blueprints on top of water now. It takes a while for bots to build this stuff this far out, but it's not like I'm going to be finished before they're done. I am using about 1 billion turbo belts, but Vulcanus is still going strong. However, with the sheer number I needed for the red circuits, Fulgora is struggling to supply me with electroplants, and that would be because it's completely out of scrap. I was mostly joking, but yeah, that extra scrap patch lasted me about 4 hours. I'll deal with that as soon as I finish up the final part of the circuit build, which is the processing units. Since electroplants are 4x4, you can actually fit undergrounds between the inserters to fit the sulfuric acid pipes. That allows me to build it nice and compact. But then just gotta copy it a couple times, and that's it for all the circuits. Before I build myself into too much of a corner, I want to reserve some space for rails. And even though I swore not to use the SAC junction again after everyone in my Discord made fun of it, it's the only thing that'll fit here. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that I've had this icon flashing here for the past 5 hours because I accidentally jettisoned something onto Fulgora's surface and there's no way to get it remotely. Unluckily for us, Fulgora managed to squeak out just enough electroplants to finish the circuit build, so now I've got an excuse to put off going there and fixing it. Beyond the circuits, the other great reason to use molten metal on Nalvis is for the improved low-density structure recipe. Technically, it takes 25 plates worth of molten copper compared to the 20 plates of the usual recipe, but that's immediately countered by the bonus 50% productivity. Just like on Vulcanus, once I've got the pipes filled, it's just a matter of plugging in the plastic. If it wasn't for the limited availability of water and oil on Vulcanus, I'd be tempted to move my whole base there. Because of the pipeline length limitations, I'm making another couple stops for molten iron and copper, which will supply most of the real base. Obviously, I'll need some stops to drop off plastic as well, though once again I can use the majesty of elevated rails to avoid needing an intersection. I don't want to spend too much time because this video's already long enough as is, but this base is going to be a whole lot of redesigning things with the new buildings in mind. For example, I can turn all this molten iron into all the components necessary to make engine units on the spot. I know I have a bit of a reputation for just skipping over most of my builds, but really 90% of them boil down to 2 belts, 2 inserters, and 1 output just copied in a line. As always, the best part is copying it as many times as necessary. With nothing but this one pipe, this build will print engines. With how great the foundries are, there is one thing that we need electric furnaces for, and that's stone bricks. But the demand is pretty small, so this relatively minor build here should be more than enough. It is nice to fill out these disciplined spaghetti-type bases. I'm really excited for how well these rails will allow me to build compacted designs in future runs, so this one is kinda like practice. I'm going to put in a couple more fluid stops for the molten metal, as well as another stop for stone, because apart from making bricks, it'll also be used in rails. I've got the bricks nearby because I'm going to put purple science here, but for that I'll need a ton of steel. And by using the power of foundries, I can make what used to take hundreds and hundreds of electric furnaces just in this small footprint here. But then I get distracted and start making batteries. You know how things go. I'll feed these with the same sulfuric acid that the processing units are using, and unlike most of my builds, this one's going to feed from the central belt and output to the outer belts. Okay, the electric furnace assemblers are pretty straightforward since I've already got the advanced circuits all planned out. Hope it's not too hard to follow with all these empty belts, but I'm not going to be prepared to turn this thing on until it's done. I'm going to need tons of rails, but fortunately you can make iron rods directly in foundries as well. It ends up a little awkward because I had to fit the foundries making the rods on the other side of the rails, then combine those with stones from the train, but it'll work. The only ingredient I'm missing now is productivity modules, but we've already got enough green circuits and advanced circuits, so all I've got to do is pull them off the circuit bus. Also, they can be made in electroplants, which is great. All of this has been to support 40 Tier 3 assemblers of purple science. Even without any modules or beacons, that's around 350 science per minute. But the build's straightforward, so moving on. The next science to be rebuilt is yellow science, and while I've already got the LDS and processor units, I'm missing the robot frames, so here's the electric engines they take. This is a neat little trick where I can put the circuits on the outside of the belt so that I can use filtered splitters and then feed the finished engines directly onto the belts, since frames and electric engines both take green circuits. Those will also take some of the batteries I've already made below, as well as some steel. I've got loads of molten metal lying around, so I can just slap down foundries wherever they'll fit, seeing as they don't take much steel, at least compared to rails and furnaces. Then those will feed directly into the yellow science. I'll worry about routing the belts later, because I want to put down some more weird rails. Why not just go right over the top of the purple science? Blue science is weird because it takes way more assemblers than every other science to craft. The ideal ratio for this would be 69, but I'm making 72 instead because this is a strict no funny zone. I've technically already built everything chemical science takes, it's only a matter of getting it there. The advanced circuits and engine units are easy, but the sulfur takes its own train, which I'll fit in right here and run between the assemblers. Then there's the red science, but that's so easy it hardly warrants mention. Since I've got all that delicious metal juice nearby, I can just siphon off a bit from the LDS build, and with only 4 foundries, make enough to supply the entire science build. After that, I've got green science left to sort out. It's actually one of the more complicated ones because I can't just make the whole thing in foundries. I can make the belts, but the inserters still need to be made in assemblers. The problem is that I still only need like 2, so it's in this awkward place where I need decent throughput, but not enough to warrant a proper build, so you end up with whatever this is. So ordinarily I'd say that I've finished all the sciences, then gaslit you into thinking military science doesn't exist, but in Space Age it actually has some major uses, so I've got to build that. Since it takes grenades, I'll need to stop for coal. I'll run a massive belt for the bricks later, but just these 2 wall assemblers will be enough for the whole build. You need 8 grenade assemblers for every 10 science assemblers, but the real headache is the ammunition. Just like the red science, I'm going to borrow fluids from the LDS build and then use it to make the iron, copper, and steel plates that the ammo needs. And I am really liking how I can just put these foundries underneath the rails. It makes the recipe icons look a little bit weird, but what can you do? Seriously, compared to the other sciences here, military took the most effort, but finally the yellow ammo, steel, and copper plates can go into making the red ammo. Also, I completely forgot that grenades take iron plates, so I fit some foundries in this space for that as well. But hey, that's military science. All the sciences actually, at least the ones on Now Vis. Pretty much the only thing I'm missing at this point is a stop to drop off the rocket fuel, but after that I finish routing all the belts for every single science pack, and I'm done. Since I've got LDS, fuel, and processing units, here's where I'm gonna stage all my rockets. It's great because whenever I feel like I need more, I can just paste a couple more silos. I hate that this iron patch is here, uglifying my base, but that's life, I guess. This is where I'm going to put the landing pad, but you can only have 1 per surface, so I can't place it until I make the move official by deconstructing the one in the old base. I've built this abomination to help visualize where I'm going to put it, but these inserters will handle all of the extraplanetary sciences. 1 inserter per science pack is technically throughput limited to only being able to move 840 science packs per minute, but I doubt that'll be an issue. The thing that really makes this awkward is that I'm planning for a new laboratory building, but I don't have them yet, because that requires going to Gleba. At least that won't be far off as soon as I'm done. The last step is the key to everything, taking calcite from the landing pad and then loading it onto a train to be taken to the ore melting stations. That leaves the issue of actually getting the calcite. I don't want to use my existing Vulcanist ship because calcite is pretty bulky and that ship isn't really suited for constant back and forth, so I'm making a new one. It took me way too long to realize that the thrusters are flow-through and you can just do this to pass through fuel. Those extra thrusters will need more fuel production, but apart from being scaled up, this one's very similar to the other ship. I've decided to give it even more iron production because I want there to be a 0% chance of this thing ever breaking. I didn't really bother ratioing this thing out because this thing's really just intended to be a flying brick. Because of the range of the guns, making them overshoot the width of the ship by too much means that they'll just waste ammo shooting at things that weren't a threat anyway, so don't go crazy with them. There's also this relatively obscure mechanic where if you don't fill your thrusters all the way, you can actually make them more fuel efficient. And if you can keep them at 80% full, you're still gonna get max thrust. The only problem is that it's difficult to actually throttle the fuel input. Best thing I came up with was a clock that pulses the fuel pumps, but it's not perfect. If only you could control the flow rate directly via circuits, but there we go. I'm hitching along for the ride because I've actually got to set up the calcite rockets. With the game officially updating to 2.0, I get to watch the brand new landing animation. Smooth. Alright, now all I've got to do is set up a bunch of new rockets, which is easy when you've already got a whole base set up. This guy's going to watch while I divert some calcite over here. Unlike the other rockets, I'm going to load them directly with the calcite. If you don't like relying on logistic bots, rockets that are filled preemptively will still launch automatically when something with that request appears in orbit. After over 7 years, it's weird seeing the new 2.0 rocket sprites. While I'm here, I figure I might as well deal with my impending coal problem. The patch is almost dead, so I've got to expand to a new patch. The only problem is the demolishers loathe rails, and the only other coal patch is all the way over there, so I've got to do some more worm extermination. At least I get to see the new death animation, but there's more. The worm covering the actual patch is of the medium variety, meaning that they've got way more health and way more regen. Also, I just instantly explode. It's definitely a bit tougher than the small ones. Clearly, I just didn't have enough guns. There we go. Now I'm free to plunder his territory. It's even got a tungsten patch for later. Like I said, this stuff is vital for making the science and the rockets, but I'm not going to bore you with the complexities of setting up the stations. It picks things up and puts them down somewhere else. What do you want? But I will mention how much I love being able to plan out a massive squiggly line over the lava with one click. If only they could invent rails that had power poles built in. But this is just another simple two-way rail line with a small waiting bay so that two trains can cycle without getting stuck. I feel like this is exactly what the devs had in mind when they made elevated rails. And now I can return to Nauvis with all my calcite, safe in the knowledge that Vulcanus won't run out of coal for another 100 hours. I wish I could start up the base right now, but that would cause my power grid to explode. The octagon of power is nice, but it's not nearly enough. I used to have that tileable nuclear blueprint, but it's outdated now, so I've got to make a new one. Unlike last time, it doesn't take me 3 hours to do it, and that's because the new fluid mechanics mean that I don't need 12 separate water and steam pipes. This is still technically tileable, but I think it'll break if I stack too many steam turbines in a row, but I shouldn't need that much power. Let's say one last goodbye to the old square base. This wasn't a segue to turning it on, I've still got biters to deal with. I spent literally 1 hour trying to roll for a rare tank just so that I could fit 2 more exoskeletons in its equipment grid. Was it worth it? You tell me. Now I've got to work on my cuck box, and the most economical way to do that is with rows and rows of flamethrowers. I also need to include roboports so that the bots can automatically repair the perimeter. And with the new update, I won't need to worry about placing them so far out because the bots don't get stuck in infinite loops trying to cross vast distances without coverage anymore. Also, I don't need to place radars anymore because roboports give vision in their radius. I forgot about it, but the new pipeline length limitations make surrounding yourself in one giant flamethrower wall a little bit more annoying because now you need to stop every few chunks and add a pump. But after an eternity, I've completely sealed myself in. Like the video if you agree that mech armor should have increased melee damage. Okay, trains need fuel, but another amazing thing that the devs added are these train interrupts. I imagine you could do a lot more with them, but most simply, you can make it so that if the train runs low on fuel, it'll interrupt its usual schedule and head straight to the fuel stop instead. Now I can have one fuel stop instead of needing to put requester chests with fuel at every single train station. What'll they think of next? Alright, after 10 squintillion years, let's finally get this ball rolling, okay? I just love the way the sound changes on elevated rails. There's the first of many lanes of iron, but then it's back to the mines. Then I'll do one for copper ore. It immediately detects that it's low on fuel, and because of my genius planning, it needs to take the most circuitous route possible to get to the fuel stop, but at least you get to see all of my beautiful work. By the way, I'm really glad that they added in the hotkey to hide all GUI elements, because I used to need a mod to do that for my videos. It's Control-Shift F4, and make sure you don't accidentally hit Alt instead, because that closed my game. I'm ready to bulldoze the landing pad at the starter base and give it a new home. And as soon as it's down, I can set a request for calcite and watch as it rains down from the heavens. By the way, cargo bays are necessary for increasing the number of deliveries that a pad can receive at once. After all that, it's just a quick train ride to the foundries. Seriously, there is just something about these elevated rails that is intrinsically satisfying to watch. I can just sit here all day. And so I will. But before long, the calcite has arrived. I probably should have loaded up all the stations with ore beforehand so that this would have looked even more impressive, but Well, no time like the present to start, and this is when it's really convenient to blueprinter trains. They're running around like ants. This is the reason I wanted small trains, but even with this, I don't think that the elevated rails were truly necessary. Because of how powerful the new buildings are, you need way fewer trains, so I think it'll take mods to really push the elevated rails to their limits. Case in point, just look at this sea of circuits from only 2 trains. And for the rest, we'll just need a little plastic. then a little sulfuric acid. Okay, so I completely forgot to build it, but I also need some lubricant, and so I'll just tack on another random station over here. The last little thing is this sulfur train, but it's incredible how moments after setting up all the trains, everything's already completely filled with items. All the science is sciencing, and this whole build is finally online. But of course, it's not a real base unless it has concrete, so I've got to set up even more foundries. I'll just borrow some of the molten iron and bricks nearby and start collecting that stuff while they finish off the base. The moment the rocket fuel train pulls in, I can start building my rockets. And just look at all that beautiful science on the belts. I've also added the requests for the extraplanetary sciences, and those come pouring in soon after since all of my ships have just been chilling in orbit. It'll look even better when I finish the other 3 science packs. Like I said, I'm planning for the new labs, but I've still got to research them first, so I set up a quick sushi science setup. It's incredibly simple, just reading the contents of the belts and subtracting that from a bunch of constants. That sets the filters on the inserters, and if I set a constant of 200 science and the belt reads 201, then the signal will go negative and won't appear as a filter anymore. Ergo, the inserters won't add more until it's below that amount again. By the way, that blinking cargo pod alert is still there, so finally I'm heading out to go deal with it. That's what I get for not building a cargo landing pad on this planet. I'm still out of scrap, and I promised I'd deal with it, so here's another elevated rail. Those other patches only had like 300k in them, but this one island of scrap has like 66 million. The only problem is how cramped it is, and how once again they'll also need their own electric network, but it shouldn't need more accumulators than this. Scrap mines incredibly fast. Alright, that'll keep this trash heap going for the foreseeable future. I kept promising myself I'd make a more proper build here, but this is doing good enough, so it's looking like this is going to be the final design. I've got more important things to do anyway, like placing concrete everywhere. Ah, now it's a real base. Next up is Gleba, but all my other ships feel quite a bit outdated, so I'm going to make a new one. Once again, it's very similar in concept to all my others, so I'm not going to explain much about the thrusters and the fuel production. But unlike the calcite cruiser, I've remembered that I can actually just use foundries in space. The one downside is they're quite power hungry, even reduced 80% with efficiency modules, so that's why I've started spamming solar panels at the square base in hopes for the rare ones. The other downside is that they need calcite, which I can't get from space, but I can just bring that up from Nauvis and pull it from a hub. It's well worth it. One molten foundry is enough to support 4 plate foundries, and that's enough to support about 10 assemblers working non-stop. I don't need to design my ships like this, but I want to. After that, it's basically done. I'm just waiting for my gambling machines to make more rare panels. Also, it really helps when I realize that you can make solar panels and accumulators in electroplants. But without further ado, we're off to Gleba. And it's really satisfying watching your ships fly off for the first time. Anyway, here we are, and you may have heard many things about Gleba, and I'm here to say that they're all absolutely true. Gleba is a beautiful planet, and everything revolves around bioprocessing. There's no coal, iron, copper, or oil to be found anywhere, and if you want to make iron and copper ore, you need to breed bacteria to get it. It's the most unique planet, and probably the hardest of the beginning 3, so to make it less painful, I've shipped in an entire nuclear reactor. It crashed my game when I tried to paste it, but after the next update, it didn't explode, so hooray! Also, I love how you can just place a blueprint in the logistics requests and it'll automatically set it to request everything necessary to build that blueprint. Stone is the only natural resource, and some things here take landfill, so I got this mining drill making some. Pretty much everything else comes from these jelly nut and Yamako plants you can find. The only problem is, they go bad and turn into worthless spoilage if you wait too long, and that's the core of the challenge on Gleba. You can turn them into jelly and mash respectively, and you can combine those into a biochamber to get bioflux. Except the biochamber takes nutrients to run. You can get nutrients from pretty much everything here, but bioflux is the best at it. I've also handcrafted one earlier, but I'll need more, and you'll never guess what that means. Gleba also has hostile natives, and the pentapods probably don't appreciate me blasting apart their nests, but I need their eggs. With pentapod eggs, I can make even more biochambers. It's a beautiful cycle. This planet is actually fairly new to me, because it's completely different from how it was at the LAN event. Back then you could just mine iron and copper from the ground in really tiny ore patches, and instead of making bioflux, you made something called jelly yum, with bioflux being something else entirely. Basically, what I'm saying is I can't pretend to be more competent than I am, but the key to all of this are these plants. You can pick them by hand, but this is Factorio, so of course you can automate it. These new agricultural towers will cover an area and automatically harvest any plants in its range. The problem is, once they've picked them all, they don't come back. That is, unless you supply the seeds, which I will bring in via logistics robots because I am lazy. Alright, I got my balls and my nuts. It should be straightforward to turn them into a mash and then bioflux, right? Wrong! In order to do that, I need to fuel the biochambers with nutrients. The problem with nutrients is that they can go bad, and that means I'll need to keep this thing constantly topped up with new nutrients as the other ones are consumed or spoil. The issue with that is that they can spoil on the belts, and if you're not constantly moving stuff around, you'll end up with your entire build clogged up with spoilage, so the nutrient belt is going to be circular. The Yamako mash is about 1-to-1 for bioflux, but one jelly chamber can feed 3, so while the mash directly inserts, the jelly is on its own line. Compared to the whole fruit, which lasts an entire hour before going bad, the jelly and mash will rot in only 3 minutes, so the less time from chamber to chamber, the better. And that's because the final product inherits the freshness of its ingredients. Also, I haven't had time to mention it, but we can get rid of this spoilage by turning it into nutrients. I know it sounds backwards, but 10 spoilage can make 1 pile of nutrients, starting out at 50% freshness. Mashing stuff also makes seeds, so I've got some provider chests holding onto them so that the bots can bring them to the farms to make even more fruits. Look at this doofus. With just this, we're already halfway done with the science, but the pentapods aren't going to be happy when they see the next step, and that's because we need to breed even more eggs to turn into science. 1 pentapod egg will turn into 2 if you give them some nutrients and water. They take a good amount of nutrients, but fortunately bioflux turns into 40, so I'll just use that. One thing I did mess up with was I built more egg breeders than I could support because I forgot to take into account that some of the nutrients will need to go into fueling the chambers themselves. Because it takes eggs to make eggs, it's important that you also route the output back in as input to continue the cycle before sending off any excess to be used for science. Eggs and bioflux is all it takes to make the science, and I built twice as many science assemblers as I can support because I screwed up again and didn't realize that the eggs per second of the machines doesn't count the half that I need to send back. Also, just like everything else, these eggs can spoil, and when they do, they try to kill you. That's not even the worst part. It's that if I run out of eggs, the entire process will stop and require manual intervention to restart. To solve this, I have created a genius device. It's a heating tower that burns things and turns them into heat, but I like to call it the Orphan Obliterator 9000 because it ensures that eggs will always be cycling even if the science gets backed up. You know the best thing about all this? The science can spoil too, and it gets less and less effective as it starts to rot, so you really want to constantly keep this process going. Remember when I said that you need to cultivate bacteria to make iron and copper? Well, we're not going to be doing any of that, because that's only relevant if you aren't going to be shipping in everything from outside. It makes me feel a little guilty for leaving Gleba out hanging like that, but with how powerful my Nauvis base is, it's the economical choice. Also, making things on site means more farming, and that means more angry natives. Actually, more like hungry. Anyway, I'm just going to be bringing in steady shipments of rocket components and other supplies. My farms can't keep up with this production though, and while I've got the seeds, I just don't have enough arable land. I can solve that by placing down this artificial soil, which used to be way more annoying to craft, and I complained specifically about that, so feel free to thank me. Also, I complained a lot about the farming, so thanks to me, the yields of each plant were cut in half, meaning that you need to produce twice as many spores to get the same level of production as before, and thus incur twice the risk of attack. You're welcome. I also double up the bioflux production. This thing isn't the prettiest build, but it's functional. Let's just say that I'm saving building a proper Gleba base for future challenges. It's not that I necessarily want to be off this planet as soon as possible, it's just that I'm really excited to get back home with all this new science I've made, and I've got to leave before it all rots. Back on Nauvis, all I've got to do is add agricultural science to my sushi belt, and my delightfully deliquescent bounties are ready for research. There are several powerful technologies behind plant science, but the one I want the most is biter captivity, and it's about as crazy as it sounds. But to make the capture rockets, I need 20 bioflux, so I've got to set up the shipping for that as well. It lasts like 2 hours, but much like us, it all rots eventually. While I'm placing more concrete, I'll also point out that I'm researching rocket turrets, because they're very important. But moving on, it's time to capture some biters. For some reason, they're not excited about becoming parts of horrors beyond their imagination, but my tank will change their minds. Now I've got capture rockets loaded into my rocket launcher, and all I gotta do is fire at the nests. Spiders still spawn from them while they try to break the device, but after a while, you've got your own captive spawner. You might wonder why on Now Vist you would want this, but we need their eggs. I'm starting to think that we might be the bad guy. But no, what's strange is not wanting to be one with the factory. These things also take bioflux to feed and take damage over time if you don't feed them. After that, they'll revert back to normal spawners, so you gotta keep that bioflux coming. Using the power of children, I can create biolabs. These things are insane. Just like all the other space buildings, they have a 50% bonus, but instead of just 50% productivity, they go even further. They have the drain of each research pack, effectively doubling your science per minute right away. And that's not to mention that they're faster and can fit more modules. They are insane. I've got the agricultural science on its own belt because, again, it can rot, and it's easier to clean off rotten science if it's not mixed in with something else. There is one major downside to biolabs, however, and that's that they don't go zippy-zap and they're not compatible with the Disco Science mod. They're good enough to make up for those downsides, but it's really close. We're also getting close to the end game, but first I need to make an emergency visit to Gleba. I'm not farming enough Yamakos, and so I set up another agricultural tower. But then my jelly nuts get attacked by these horrible creatures. These are stompers, and they are an absolute menace. The lasers I had set up simply weren't enough to stop them, and they can walk right over walls. In response, I destroy all of their egg rafts. If I just take out all of the nests within my spore clouds, I can buy more time where I don't need to think about it, so that's what I've decided to do. Those Tesla towers you get from Fulgora would have been great here, but I completely forgot that they existed. Back to my Yamakos, you can turn off the towers with circuits, but I wish there was a way to only turn off harvesting, so you can make it to where they could still plant seeds, but only pick things up as I need them. I'm also here for another very important item. This is the last thing I really need Gleba for, but I've unlocked carbon fiber, and it takes carbon and mashed Yamakos to make. The only issue is that the only source of carbon on this planet is spoilage, so I've got this weird sushi belt that waits until the mash spoils so that I can turn that into carbon to make the fiber. I decide that that's not enough stuff rotting at once, so I add a little more. I don't recommend copying this design, but it's okay because carbon fiber is hardly used. However, what it's used for is very important. Rocket turrets. Rocket turrets, big deal, you might say. And yeah, it's not like I've got problems dealing with biters or pentapods, but the rockets aren't for the flesh bags. The road to the final planet is a rocky one, literally. If you try and fly to Aquilo unprepared, you will get your face smashed in by asteroids the size of assembling machines, and mere bullets are helpless against them. Once again, we're going to be building another space platform, but this one's a little different. Remember when I said that there was no calcite in space? Well, I lied, and that's because I couldn't get calcite yet. Once you get agricultural science, you unlock better fuel and oxidizer recipes. They take all the same stuff, except one chunk of calcite. Along with the better fuel, you also get advanced asteroid processing, which on top of what asteroids already give you, iron, carbon, ice, you get copper, sulfur, and calcite respectively. Because now it takes 2 ingredients, I've switched to making oxidizer and fuel on either side of the hub so I can still use one belt. Another major difference is that I can't just rely on solar. Well, I could, but it wouldn't be the best solution. Instead, I'm going to need nuclear power, and that's because the solar power is a measly 20% in the space around Aquilo. Just the 40 megawatts from one reactor should be good enough. And just like the calcite for the Gleba glider, I'll just grab the fuel cells from the hub. By the way, you can't grab from the cargo bay extenders, only the hub itself. You might be worried about the water consumption for the reactor, but there's way more oxide asteroids as you approach Aquilo. Although the calcite recipe is way slower for ice, so you will want some normal recipes as well. I've got to make molten iron again, and it's nice that I can just get calcite for free now, but it shouldn't shock you that if I want to use rocket turrets, I need to make rockets. Those take explosives, and while there's no oil in space, we can make explosives from sulfur and coal, both of which can be obtained from the new advanced carbonic asteroids recipes. You can just bring explosives or even rockets up from the ground just to skip all this, but I made an oath to make everything I can on site. I spent like an hour redoing this design before finally settling on this. I'm also making some Tier 3 speed modules and efficiency modules to help things along. Speed 3s take tungsten carbide, and Elf 3s take spoilage of all things. Thankfully, I've got plenty of rotten science to supply that for me. Now I just gotta make all the actual ammunition. The regular rockets are easier to make compared to the explosives and do single target damage, so we're using those. And while I do have access to copper now, I'm still going to use yellow ammo. Asteroids don't have base resistance, so there's no intrinsic advantage to red ammo compared to simply spamming more yellows. It does 60% more damage, but it also takes 60% more iron because of the steel and 5 copper plates. Not even lazy, I just legitimately don't think it's worth it. With all the guns set up, this is a very important feature they've added. You can now select filters for what your turrets are allowed to attack. Because big asteroids are basically immune to bullets, we don't want the gun shooting at them, and since medium asteroids are weak, we don't want to waste rockets shooting at them either. But now it's time to fly to the final planet. Going to Aquilo requires flying past either Gleba or Fulgora first, and it's 3 times as far from Nauvis as any of the other planets. As we approach, the turbine starts spinning faster and faster as the solar power slowly drains away. And you can see the majority of the asteroids start to transition to ice, and before long, the big boys start showing up. They take 3 rockets to take down, and then they split up into a couple medium asteroids that the guns need to finish off. This is one of the most satisfying to watch yet. But everything's been leading up to this. Welcome to Aquilo. It's covered in ice, and we've landed on pretty much the only solid land on the entire planet. See that ocean? That's not water, that is liquid ammonia. And the mech suit really comes in handy in this place. On Gleba, Vulcanus, and Fulgora, you can start a base from nothing, but on Aquilo, you are required to ship in pretty much everything you intend to build. There's 2 things you need to know about Aquilo, and that's that you can't build on ice without using concrete first, and that all of your buildings are frozen and don't work. Pipes, belts, roboports, you name it. And in order to make them work, there needs to be an adjacent heat source. Right now, I'm going to be using a nuclear reactor as a space heater, so that I can separate the ice from the ammonial solution that I'm pumping. You know how solar is 20% in space? Well, on the surface, it's only 1%. If you look at the panels, you can see that they make 960 watts. Yeah, watts. The only other thing in this game measured in watts is the idle consumption of inserters, so this one solar panel at peak efficiency can support 2 fast inserters merely existing. But if you wanted them to move at full speed, you need at least 15 of these for a single yellow inserter. However, as tiny as that is, it's still enough to slowly run this chemical plant. What we're after isn't the ammonia, it's the ice, and that's because as soon as I can melt it, I'll be able to use that water to power some steam turbines. A single steam turbine will output about 6,000 times as much power as a single rare solar panel, so it should be obvious as to why I'm doing that first. The nuclear reactor can provide its own heating as well as power. The goal here is to make the science, just like everything else, but getting there is a little special. This island is very restricting, and so the first thing I want to do is get a good supply of ice platforms. It's a simple combination of ice and ammonia, which you'll get from simply processing ammonial solution. But actually routing the heat pipes is the main challenge here. Needing to fit in heat pipes next to everything forces you to completely rethink how you approach the game. You'll be leaving a lot more gaps between buildings and to do a lot more cursing about all the tiles that pipes take up. I should mention that I absolutely love how good the frozen buildings look. It's a shame that they only show up when something's gone horribly wrong. So, about actually heating this whole thing. I could just keep using nuclear reactors, but we can simply burn things instead. There's oil on the planet, but making solid fuel the normal way would take a bunch of water. Luckily, we can combine crude oil and ammonia to make solid fuel instead, and then use that to feed into the heating tower. You get heating towers on Gleba so that you can incinerate waste, but this planet is the real use for them. Making ice platforms creates excess ammonia anyway, so you're intended to heat it like this. These ice platforms are basically the same as landfill, and completely necessary if you want to build beyond this tiny landmass. I forgot to record it, but I made an even better, tileable design for making even more ice platforms. And it's about time I mentioned that due to the extreme temperatures, the robots experience some difficulties. They burn about 5 times as much energy here as any other planet, and so building even this one little thing will drain your suit's batteries like crazy. Upgrading your suit's quality might be a good idea before coming here. Now I'll add on some more power to my janky reactor. Don't worry, I'll replace this thing eventually. Extending the pipes stole all of the heat, so it's gonna take a while for it to warm up again. My ship is constantly making trips back and forth, and this is why it really pays to make a good, robust design. I should have automated the supplies a lot more formally with logistics groups, but hey, I'm still new to this. So on our path towards science, the first thing we need is raw lithium. You'll notice that I'm planning it with cryogenic plants, even though that it can be made in chemical plants. But this is where we unlock cryo plants, so there's no sense in making a design that'll be outdated in 10 minutes. That goes into furnaces to become lithium plates, but another thing you'll notice is that it takes a holmium plate. If we want science to flow, we will need constant shipments from Fulgora, but that isn't so bad since Fulgora is on the way to Aquilo anyway. It's almost like they did that intentionally. Most of my time is spent trying to wrap my head around to the heat pipes, and so far it seems that the answer is lots of long-handed inserters and underground belts. I want to make a good tileable design so that I can expand it to meet demand. Time to actually make the cryo plants. They do take lithium, but there's raw lithium in a few of the icicles you can harvest, so that'll get you started before you can automate them. They also take superconductors, which once again are shipped in from Fulgora. I still have some tweaks to do, but I just like looking at it while it's frozen. The other ingredients are ammonia and lithium brine. We know how to get the ammonia already, but the lithium brine comes from the ground in places like this. The game always spawns a patch not too far from your starting location, so it's not too difficult. The hardest part about it is just bringing heat pipes over to this island to thaw the pump jacks. For the ammonia, obviously I've just got to process the solution, but this time it's the ice that we'll have too much of. A lot of it will go into powering the base, and some of it is used in a later process, but we'll still get way too much of it. The solution is, well, I'll get to that later. What's important is that we make lots and lots of ammonia, because not only is it necessary in making lithium, it's also going to be the source of all the fuel that we'll use for heating. You really appreciate how quickly your bots drain when you need to move a whole build like this after not giving yourself enough space. Pipe logistics are a lot more restrictive when you need a big heating pipe next to them all the time. It makes them no better than belts, and I like how you can see the contrast between my clean, tileable builds versus all the nonsense I had to do to move the items between them because I didn't account for that in my designs. I've got a bunch of rocket fuel that I brought in to try and preheat the towers. The buildings consume heat slowly, and so it takes a while for that to propagate through the heat pipes. There's also this fluoroketone stuff that takes all those things we just made, plus fluorine. I tack it on right before the raw lithium. I also need to pull the holmium from the cargo pad so that I can make the lithium itself. Again, it's all become a bit of a mess, especially since I need to move water out and crude oil in. But before I go any farther, I need to make the actual nuclear reactor first. It doesn't need to be too huge, and so I'll be making it with 3 reactors. And I've always wondered if it worked this way, and indeed, building the reactor's offset does not give you the neighbor bonus. Also, it might be strange, but pipes carrying 500 degrees of steam still need to be heated. The reactors will supply the heating, and while it does reduce the amount of power I can get out of them because some of the heat is being used to warm instead of boil water, it's worth it for the reliability. Then I'll cover up the rest of that oil field with pumps so that my main build can create solid fuel. If you want to scale up this planet, you'll need to go really far with trains to find the other patches, but fortunately this will be enough. Okay, the only thing I'm missing now is that fluorine gas, and unlike the brine, it's all the way up here. Getting heat to this place to thaw all the pipes and pump jacks is going to take quite the effort. And you want to know my only legitimate complaint about Space Age? It's that no matter what you do, the heat pipes are always 15 degrees Celsius. No matter how long you leave it on the surface of a planet that's like -100, it will never dip below 15. Like, I can understand the engineer's pocket warmth being 15 degrees C, but not the planet's surface. I guess it would be too hard if you had to restart your base from -200 degrees Celsius. Anyway, it's only when everything's heated up that you can see the errors of my ways, but now we've got ammonia and ice flowing. That'll power the reactor and make lithium just as soon as some holmium shows up. I gave the fluorine a little help with a hand-fed heating tower, but pretty soon the whole thing's up and running. That's everything we'll need to make the cryogenic science. It takes some lithium plates, ice, as well as some cold fluoroketone. The warm stuff needs to be cooled in a separate cryo plant, and that process only eats half of it, outputting the other half as hot fluoroketones that will need to cool down again. Despite the powerful buildings, the cryoscience has a very long crafting time, and so I'll make a lot of these. I probably should have kept space for beacons, but whatever. Unlike all the other special buildings, the cryo plants don't have a 50% bonus of any kind. It just has 8 module slots and a crafting speed of 2, so I'm not too concerned about beacons. Yes, the science takes some ice, but for the amount of ammonia we need, we're still going to need to get rid of a lot of excess. And thanks to the power of 2 recyclers facing each other, we can make all of that excess ice magically disappear. As soon as the fluoroketones come in, the cryoscience is on its way. Like I said, it's funny how clean this build is, as long as you don't look at all the routing between the production areas. All that's left to do is bring it back to Nauvis, and just like Gleba, I'm gonna bring in all the rocket components by shipment. But unlike Gleba, I'm actually forced to do that. But now I'm thinking about an Aquilo-only run. Maybe if you, No, I can't be thinking about that stuff. I can make rocket fuel here, but I'd rather just use that for heating and to bring the other stuff in from Nauvis. There goes our first shipment, and I've set up the hub to request everything that the planet needs, as well as the platform to automatically bring it, so there's not much left for me to do here. Off to Nauvis we go, with the final science in tow. Watching the asteroid collectors go never gets old. And my belts become ever fuller. I really regret not color coordinating these science belts better. And you know what? Let's just double my science. Why not? The base is good for it. And this is what's weird about Space Age. For all the time that you spent researching an infinite tech that takes metallurgical science, your electromagnetic science is building up, so an SPM of like 300 on a planet is more like 1,000 when you factor in cycling between researches. The only exception is Gleba, since it rots, but that's how my tiny Fulgora base hasn't been a detriment. So now I've almost got everything I need to win the game. To win, we need to create a ship capable of reaching the end of the solar system, and just like we couldn't reach Aquilo until we had rockets, we won't be able to escape the solar system without even bigger guns. To make those, we need quantum processors, and those can only be made on Aquilo. Not only that, but they take tungsten carbide, carbon fiber, and superconductors, as well as lithium, so you need products from every single planet to make them. Fortunately, it's only one of each, so even with the massive energy drain on Aquilo, it's easy enough to handle it with logistics robots. Also, we won't need too many of these. This is mostly just to make railguns, which are unlocked with cryogenic science. Aquilo has big asteroids, but if we go even further out, we'll encounter huge asteroids, and they are virtually immune to everything. They have 5,000 health, and the only thing that they aren't at least 99% resistant to is physical damage, but they've got a flat 3,000 damage reduction instead, so you need to be able to do at least more than that in one shot to even dent it. Fortunately, that's exactly what railguns do. To make them, we need to barrel in some fluoroketones. I also haven't been talking about quality too much, but with cryogenic science, we can also unlock the legendary quality. You can see the range of these bad boys, but I would not recommend trying to defend your base with them. You can, but it would be like using C4 to take out an anthill. Before we enter the home stretch, I'm finally setting up automation for those stack inserters on Gleba, even though that they're not really useful for the level of production that I'm going for. Also, Fulgora is drowning in trash, and when what I need is mostly holmium, I've got to destroy everything else so that I can keep getting it. And even though Vulcanus rarely causes me grief, I've mostly drained my original tungsten patch, so I've got to sort that out. I don't need to kill any worms this time, but I do need to build more rails. If you've ever dreamed of building on lava, as soon as you get cryoscience, you can unlock Foundation. It's really expensive to make, but it lets you build over the lava of Vulcanus and the oil oceans of Fulgora. The only problem is it was messing up with my railway planner because it kept trying to place foundations that I didn't have instead of just avoiding it. But fortunately, the developers anticipated this, and someone informed me that you can hold Control instead of Shift to plan non-destructive paths. But apart from that, yeah, more tungsten. I should also mention that once you research belt stacking from Gleba, big miners will automatically stack the ores when they output onto the belt. As if 60 items per second wasn't enough, turbo belts can carry 240 items per second if they're all stacked. I am pretty burnt out from megabasing, but I don't think you need me to tell you that the potential for 2.0 megabases is insane. However, I am in it to win it, so with nothing but space between me and victory, it's time to build the final space platform. This one's going to need to trump all the others, and not only will it need to make bullets and rockets, but it'll need to make railgun ammunition as well. And not only that, there's one spot left on the science belts, and that's reserved for Promethium science, the forbidden science pack that can only be crafted in the deepest depths of space. You don't need it to win, but I can't just not make it. I will say, my favorite thing about these space platforms is how the mass affecting the thrust encourages you to build these compact designs. I've always been one to cram things together as much as possible, and being rewarded for it really makes me want to go all out on these unorthodox designs. But with that sorted out, I need to deal with the power. I considered using nuclear again, but why would I do that when I've unlocked fusion power? Fusion power is all new and unlocked by cryoscience. Both the reactor and the generator take tons of quantum processors, and I've got to make them on a Quilo, as well as the fuel cells, which are pretty cheap all things considered. But once I go through the effort of shipping them in, we're in business. One reactor makes 100 megawatts worth of plasma, and one generator makes 500 megawatts of power, so we'll need two. They also require fluoroketones and ketone cooling. Technically, I only needed one of these to meet demand, but personally, I demand symmetry. I only considered nuclear because of their fluoroketone demand, but that was before I realized that it was 100% efficient. You only need to load it with enough to run the process, and then it'll cycle that same fluid infinitely. The plasma from the reactor can't be put in pipes, so you'll need to attach the generators directly. But after that, we just gotta make some inserters, grab the fuel cells from the hub, and there it is. Unlike the nuclear reactors, fusion reactors only burn fuel when there's demand, so it's totally efficient. And here's where I'll make the science, but more on that later. To support this beast, I'll need asteroid collectors as always, but now that I've unlocked the legendary quality, shouldn't they be legendary collectors? I'm going to go for the most brain-dead way of grinding quality, and that's by just making a ton of the same item until I roll a good one. Except making a legendary item from normal quality ingredients is like 1 in 10,000. That's why you can also craft a legendary item from legendary ingredients. I just have an extra assembler for every rarity and a loop. This way, any lame collectors will be recycled for a chance to get higher quality ingredients, and then slowly assemble the higher tier ones. Because recycling machines have a chance to increase quality when they break things apart, I just need to keep cycling over and over again until I get enough. I'll just let this run while I'm finishing with the platform. Now comes the part where I need to actually make the ship's ammunition. For how dense the asteroids are out there, I'm going to want a lot, but fundamentally it won't be that different. I've got 2 separate sushi belts that'll handle all the raw asteroids, but everything else will be direct insertion. Here's all the carbonic crushing for the explosives. For some bizarre reason, railgun ammo also takes explosives, so I'll need to make even more for that than just the rockets. And maybe one day I'll manage to clear all this excess out of Fulgora. Just as I'm getting into it, I am rudely interrupted by pentapods annihilating my nuts, so I've got to go deal with that. It's the damn stompers again. They can expand just like biters, but after unexpanding them, I get back to work. Before, the ratio of coal compression to explosives crafting was annoying, but now that I can make explosives in the cryoplants, it's a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, so that's nice. One thing that isn't nice is that the ratio of carbon and sulfur isn't perfect, so I'll need to clear the belts of excesses occasionally. But some circuits will take care of that to shunt the excess onto the main line so that they can be tossed into space. Now I've got to figure out the smelting. But this is different because the railgun ammo also takes copper cables, so I'll need some of that advanced metallic asteroid processing. Not that much copper though, and I'm still ignoring piercing ammunition in favor of yellow ammo, so just 1 molten copper foundry should be enough. It does mean that I need to ensure that any iron ore from the advanced process gets used with priority so that it won't get clogged. But now I get to finally make the ammunition. It's easy to forget how huge this thing is compared to my other ships. And as always, I really prefer my unorthodox shapes. This is probably enough, but don't quote me on that. Worst case scenario, I can use some modules, but even with 90 gigawatts of usable power at my disposal, I don't want to push it too far. So for the railgun ammunition, I need some copper cable, but instead of making that directly in a foundry, I decide to make the plates and then the actual cable in an electroplant. It allows me to get that extra 50% free productivity from the foundry and the electroplant, allowing me to get the most out of my molten copper supply. I'm not sure how many of these I need to make, seeing as I've never flown out here before, but this seems like a decent amount. Oh yeah, they also take steel, but I can just make that out of the molten iron up here. Now it's time for the guns, and just for funs, I've started grinding quality turrets as well. With a ship this huge, the range bonus will actually come in handy. You see this range on the railguns? Well, you'd better respect it, because anything in front of that line will be obliterated. It doesn't matter if it's friend or foe, it's going away. And so you can only fit these on the front of your ships. This is probably enough guns, and you'll see that I've been doing a little explosives research, as well as physical damage research. This is why I wanted military science. Being able to do more DPS to asteroids means less ammo demand in space, so there's a real reason to research it now. It's going to take a while with the paltry amount of asteroids floating around now, Vis, but the beast awakens. Once I get a tiny bit of fuel, I try flying towards Vulcanus to get some more asteroid density, but I quickly run out. If your speed drops to 0, you'll drift 10 kilometers per hour to whichever planet is the closest. It didn't do this at the LAN, and a few people got their platforms permanently stuck, so they added it. But once again, Gleba is under attack, this time by medium stompers. The like 40 laser turrets I set up just aren't enough, so I start shipping in rocket turrets and the rockets. That should be enough to keep him at bay. Okay, this time it should fly further than 100 kilometers, and even though I said I didn't have much use for stack inserters, I realized that I can use them to stack ammunition on the belt so that I've got a bigger buffer in case my guns outstrip their ammo production. I'm about ready, but we're making the final science pack, and that takes some biter eggs. Apparently my nests broke free, but thanks to the power of laser turrets set to kill only biters, they've just been getting zapped right after they're born, and then I can come in and recapture them no problem. The problem with the biter eggs is just like the pentapod eggs, they spoil into biters, and they only have a time limit of 30 minutes, so you gotta be quick. It also takes quantum processors, but only one for every 10 bottles of science, so you hardly need any. It's been a long time coming, but it's finally time to blast off to victory. Now that we're on our way, I can share some anecdotes. The first team to win at the LAN event was obviously the speedrunners, and they did it without building anything even close to this platform. They just had tons of stockpiled ammo, and while that will win you the game still, this kind of design is what you'll want if you're going for the science from beyond. Just look at those legendary grabbers go. I've never felt like quality was truly necessary for anything during this run, but the power gap between regular collectors and legendary ones is insane. That and the legendary power poles are really the only things I'd miss without quality enabled. Alright, after a quick stop over Aquilo, it's off to the solar system's edge. It's 100,000 kilometers away, and pretty soon you'll see us put those railguns to good use. But while we enjoy the ride, I should mention that my team was the only other one out of the 10 or 12 teams that managed to win within the 5-day event. And though we were the second furthest of anyone, our win wasn't exactly legitimate. When you're building your space platform, you might one day notice that while you can make it as wide as you want, eventually you will reach a height limit, and that's pretty much our fault. I'm not even taking credit. I was trying to speedrun Aquilo so that we might win at the last minute, while Hornwister and some of the other Clusterio people were experimenting in the editor. And what they discovered is that the asteroids only spawn at the top of the screen and slowly drift towards the bottom. The platform only breaks when the hub is destroyed, and they realized that if you simply made your space platform around 3,300 tiles tall and gave it a single engine with 50,000 units of buffered fuel and oxidizer, no matter how big the asteroids were, they simply couldn't reach your hub before your ship traveled the whole 100,000 kilometers to victory, so no defense is necessary. The problem was that we hadn't even researched the ability to actually select the edge of the solar system as our destination, so we were really trying to rush through cryoscience for that. But that wasn't until Trupin, while experimenting with designs, imported a blueprint that had the destination already selected as the edge of the universe, and if you pasted that on top of your hub, it would allow you to fly there without completing the research. So obviously when you combined those things, you didn't even need to visit any of the planets. Needless to say, that's how we won, but it was funny going on stage while they were streaming our game on the big screens because Trupin announced that we were about to win and showed the ship I'd built to get to Aquilo since it was the most impressive looking ship we had before being like, oh, wrong ship, and pulling up a 3-kilometer long stick with a thruster on it. The platform's name was The Intended Way, and watching Kovarex's utterly bemused face as he stared transfixedly at this massive wall of approaching asteroids obliterating the ship one tile at a time is something I'll never forget. Everyone was laughing, and after we won, Kovarex got on stage and simply said, "This is what we get for trying to be too nice to the players." Then after watching that, the speedrunner team got to work in what little time remained on the final day and were able to fly to the edge of space in under 3 hours using that tech we'd discovered. That was definitely the highlight. And now I'm glad to have won Space Age legitimately. It took me almost 80 hours, but I imagine I could get the 40-hour achievement on my next attempt. Also, once you win, you get the option to upload your run to the Factorio website for other people to look at. That's not the end, however. We've still got that science to make, and to do that we need to fly to the Shattered planet. It's 4 million kilometers away, but you're not really intended to actually reach it, though a small handful have. What you're here for are these huge Promethium asteroids. Their chunks are the final ingredient for Promethium science, and they can only be harvested around the Shattered planet. I'm glad there's a lore reason for why the space around Nauvis is absolutely littered with ungodly amounts of asteroids. I don't know about you, but don't those Promethium chunks look like they taste good? It is so satisfying watching these things work, but as you can see, the asteroid density is pretty thick out here. I'm forced to stop because my design needs some tweaking to keep up with the asteroids at this speed. And unfortunately, I was only able to gather a couple hundred science before the eggs spoiled. And if you were wondering whether biters can survive in space, they can! Not only that, but I don't have any weapons down here, and this thing is legitimately at risk of blowing up my hub and the whole ship along with it. I managed to move one of the rocket turrets and get it right at the edge of its range. That is certainly a risk that I did not expect to take into account. On my way back, I realized a shortcoming of my design, and that's these filter splitters. If I'm out of biter eggs to make the science, the promethium chunks can clog up the entire circular belt since they're not being consumed anymore, and that's not good when I rely on it for all of my ammo. I cut out some engines so that I could go slower on my way back to Nauvis to make some adjustments. That was just the stress test. It is a long way away, though. Back again, I don't have enough science to do anything interesting, so I gotta head back out. But before that, I use all of my rare modules I've stocked up to increase the speed of all my ammo production. I really regret not making 2 fusion reactors, because 90 megawatts isn't that much when you went to module foundries. However, it's nice that rare efficiency modules actually give them a use in counteracting the energy cost of speed modules. But after putting modules everywhere, I've close to doubled my ammo production. I would say that I liked how the spoilage of the biter eggs forces you to make a decently fast ship, but I've seen promethium science designs that just use thousands of woven underground belts to store tens of thousands of promethium chunks so that you can just make it in Nauvis orbit. Anyway, I have a better go the second time around, and pretty soon I'm flying back with a few thousand in tow. So, promethium science. It's used to research one thing, but that's a pretty good one thing. It's research productivity. Yeah, every time you research this, you get an extra 10% on all of your research for free, so obviously that is insane. I'm starting to think that it might be possible to get so much damage research that you could just kill huge asteroids with gun turrets. Anyway, I just want to get a little bit more, but I still need better ammo production, so I head over to Vulcanus to try and grind out some rare foundries. I just wanted rare ones, but out of nowhere it gives me a legendary one with the absolute absurd crafting speed of 10. With these rare quality modules, it was like a 0.012% chance. Maybe this kind of luck is how I made it as a YouTuber. Also, what the hell happened to Aquilo? Remember when I said you only get to see them frozen if something goes horribly wrong? Well, foreshadowing. It took me a while to realize that it had happened because the ice platform assemblers backed up and I was relying on them to heat the pump jacks that supplied the oil that made the fuel that heated the other build. So, whoops. Restarting Aquilo is no simple task. I've got to use what little solar power there is to melt ice and slowly, painfully get enough water to kickstart the nuclear reactor so that I can power up the main build to make water again. Then I need to wait another 1,000 years for everything to thaw. After that, I give Aquilo its own fusion reactor, because it's way more reliable and won't die if the water runs out again. But while I was fixing that, the new and improved ship was making its 3rd trip. And seriously, I could just watch this thing forever. The space platforms are by far the most interesting part of Space Age, but this is what everything was leading up to. This one view of all the sciences lined up on the belts. I really regret not properly color coordinating them now. I feel like the developers made them capable of forming both a rainbow and a grayscale gradient on purpose. That's it, basically. I screwed around with whatever this is a bit, but like I said, I'm a bit too burnt out after making the Megabase to go chasing higher SPMs right now. And hey, I've got to save something for future videos, right? As always, I'd like to thank my patrons for supporting me with their boundless patience for these 2-month videos. I'll give my final thoughts in a separate video, but I just wanted to say that it feels unreal that Space Age is actually here, and it also feels unreal that I got to play it a month before everyone else. I think Space Age is going to be too long for me to make any challenge runs in the same way that I did with the standard Factorio runs, but don't worry, I've got plenty of ideas. But until next time, I'll see you later.